The following story is something I never really talk about, something that I hate bringing up constantly, but I feel like I need to get it off my chest. It happened around 2 spring breaks ago, but it continues to traumatize me to this day. I'm an Instagram model and an aspiring supermodel from Glendale, California, a city in the greater LA area. My modeling career was starting to really take off. I was getting some clothing brand deals and was starting to get a higher amount of followers. I eventually expanded my income sources from just Instagram modeling to other things. One of them was OnlyFans. I started an OnlyFans account where my followers and fans can pay to see more exclusive photos of me, and that seemed to be going great. I never got any requests from any creeps, and people were overall accepting of my decision. I eventually started gaining a lot of friends from both the online modeling and OnlyFans community. I even started collaborating with other online models and influencers. I ended up meeting a girl named Megan through other Instagram and OnlyFans connections. Megan was actually newer to this whole gig than me, but was gaining traction even quicker. Things were going really good for her, and we eventually met in person at an event. She seemed really chill, and soon a friendship was born. We would do various collaborations on OnlyFans and Instagram, and would eventually even just hang out for the fun of it. One night, however, I was scrolling through my emails and got a text message from Megan. Apparently, a really famous online influencing team is interested in both Megan and I. Sure, I'd been scouted before, but never from an organization this large. Apparently, an agent from the modeling group reached out to Megan after seeing a photo of her and I on Instagram. They said they'd like to collaborate with us on Instagram, giving us a large sum of money and free promotion of our OnlyFans in return. It seemed great, but almost too good to be true. I wanted to confirm myself that this was a legitimate agent and not some sort of troll or scam, but when I checked the supposed agent's profile, everything seemed to check out. He had a lot of followers, real posts, and a professional page. His email had a proper domain on it too. This was really happening. Megan and I immediately asked the agent for more details, and he explained to us how it'd work. They were based in San Diego, about 2 hours away from us in LA. They wanted to do a quick photo shoot with both of us in it and discuss future opportunities while we were there. They claimed they had booked out a hotel room in the south of San Diego, and they do the shoot at a local beach. It seemed legit, so we set up a time and booked a bus over there. I was excited, but not as much as Megan though. Megan was thrilled for the whole idea. She had only been at this for about a year, and now she was working with the big companies already. It was like a dream come true for her. We eventually arrived at the hotel, and while it wasn't a 5-star resort, it was decent. We were greeted by an unusually casually dressed man at the front door. "Megan and Lisa, right?" he asked us with a grin on his face. "Yes, that's us," replied Megan jubilantly. "Alright, follow me. We got a room booked for you guys upstairs." The man guided us to our hotel room and we unpacked. Megan was still ecstatic. "Can you believe this is happening?" she asked. I was happy too, but I kept doubting her decision. The man who escorted us to our room didn't seem very professional, but hell, he could just be having a long day. Eventually we got a knock on the door. It was the man from before. He said he'd take us to the venue once we were ready, and we were. He picked us up in a rather nice car, but something didn't add up. He claimed it was the company car, but it clearly had a local rental sticker on the license plate. I again shrugged it off and got in the car. Throughout the car ride, he kept eyeing us from the rearview mirror. He asked us a few basic questions like how was our flight and where we were from. He really wasn't that inviting, especially for a brand ambassador. I started wondering again whether or not this was a bad idea, and whether I should ruin Megan's mood and let her know of my concerns. But my thought was interrupted by the car coming to a halt. We had arrived. It was a small and secluded beach area, and honestly, it was beautiful. We were going to be doing our shoot on a boat which is parked at the shore, and we would be traveling to a small nearby island with another beach on it. On the boat was about 4 to 6 men, middle-aged, and seemingly they were the camera crew. The boat was actually quite large. It was no yacht, but it did have an upper deck and a lower floor. The whole setup was a bit unusual, especially for a company of this size. I didn't see much equipment or a supervisor at all. No director, no makeup artists, just the men. Before we all got on, they searched through our handbags and said they'd hold on to them for the ride. This was really starting to alarm me, but the boat started moving and we were on our way. While Megan went up the deck and enjoyed the breeze, I went to the lower compartment of the boat and used a very small bathroom in it. As I was washing my hands, I couldn't help but think of how odd this whole gig was. I didn't see a single camera in sight, and the men on board seemed to be trying to pass as much time as possible. That's when I saw a shadow from the door. Underneath it was a pair of feet. Someone was watching me. I quickly thought about what to do. Why was this man just standing there? Was he waiting to use the bathroom too? Did he just happen to be waiting by the door while I was there? Next thing I noticed, there was 2 pairs of feet under the door, side by side. I knew that they were ganging up on me at this point. I mustered every last bit of courage in me and barged open the door, knocking both of them over. While they were down and in pain, I quickly thought of what to do next, but that's when it hit me. Megan was still at the top deck. I then heard violent trashing followed by Megan's muffled screams. I quickly ran up the stairs only to be tripped over by one of the men. I grabbed a water bottle from nearby and threw it at his head. That seemed to keep him off me for a bit. But as I got on my feet and tried to run towards the room where Megan's screams were coming from, he tried to headlock me from behind. I violently trashed around and bit down on his hand as hard as I could. He yelled in pain and threw me off to the side. I tripped over the side railing and landed in the water, still hearing Megan's screams all muffled up. I tried to swim back to the boat, but it was useless. I somehow managed to float back ashore and was taken in by a local lifeguard crew. They took me into the emergency room where they tended to my fight wounds, and I explained to them and the police everything that happened. The boat, the hotel, the rental car, the sketchy men. They managed to make 1 or 2 arrests in San Diego, but the men who took Megan were never found. The police believed that they had crossed into Tijuana and were somewhere off in Mexico. They even tried getting Mexican law enforcement in it too, but they couldn't find anything either. Not even the hotel and car rental company had any answers. I was shattered. I lost my best friend solely due to the fact that I didn't want to speak up on my suspicions. When I asked the modeling agency how they could just let this happen and how they could hire people like this, they promptly replied to me stating that they never hired a man of this name. The account, the followers, the photos, the email, all of them were fake. It turns out the entire thing was some sort of lure for a human trafficking ring, and Megan and I were the victims. To this day, I still don't know where Megan is. This incident has left me traumatized and left my career changed permanently. The story I'm about to tell you is something that I'm still in disbelief of today. Crazy things happen all the time, but even with that in mind, the situation I was knee-deep in was honestly unfathomable. I struggle to even listen to the words OnlyFans without shuddering today. This happened when I was in college, so really not that long ago. I was an engineering student, and I would often find myself in the library either doing work or catching up with other students in my college. The library was an interesting place. It seemed to attract a lot of different students from all over campus, all with their own unique tastes and experiences. The people and their thinking processes were very diverse. This meant that I'd end up meeting people with a widely different series of interests in me. One of them was a beautiful young woman named Rose. We initially struck a conversation over something casual like our shoes or the weather, but soon considered ourselves decent friends. We eventually added each other on social media, and that's when I noticed it in her Instagram bio. She had an OnlyFans. Now I personally didn't care that much. It's honestly something that we're starting to see more and more in our day and age. But I eventually realized that Rose's OnlyFans was actually quite the topic on campus. Most people I'd met seemed to have some opinion or another about Rose's OnlyFans. The opinions seemed to be split in 2 different ways. One being impressed with her confidence and the fact that she's open about having an OnlyFans, and the other half being critical of her, feeling like she has no respect for herself and feeling that she'd do anything for money. Now I personally didn't care that much, but one night, Rose seemed to be doing some sort of promotion on her OnlyFans, and my curiosity spiked. She was giving out a month of free content, and seemingly trying to gain a bigger audience. Now, signing up for an OnlyFans wasn't exactly on my list of plans for that night, but she was giving it out for free, and I figured I should check it out. After all, the whole school was talking about it, so I used a spam email of mine and signed up. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, to be honest with you. Nothing unexpected. Sure, it was somewhat awkward seeing Rose in photos like that, but hey, what was I expecting? I took a look at her subscriber count, and she seemed to have quite a lot of them. I could imagine that she's making quite a lot of money with this. A week or two passed by, and I honestly forgot that I even signed up for an account. It was interesting and all seeing Rose's OnlyFans, but I honestly had better things to do. But eventually one of my college friends told me that something happened. He told me frantically to check her OnlyFans and social media. I opened my OnlyFans and saw it. She had been kidnapped. On her OnlyFans and Twitter was a photo banner with text on it. It stated that she'd been kidnapped, and the kidnappers were looking for a lot of ransom. It mentioned that we had a few days to get the money in, otherwise they'd harm her or kill her. They also included the detail that she's being kept at a secret location, so that they'd make sure that we wouldn't find her. This had to be some sort of joke, right? I immediately messaged her various times on every single platform. No response. I asked around to other people as to what they got from her. They got no response either. All of us were in a panicked state. We had no idea what was happening or what to do. Was Rose pulling some sort of sick joke? Was she okay? That's when it hit us. Rose hadn't been seen all that past week. At that point, we knew that something might have actually happened. No one, not even her close friends, had a clue where she could be. We waited for another day, wondering when she'd drop this sick sort of joke, but that never happened. We started looking for her. Everyone on campus looked up and down the place for her, but there was no sign. Whether it was her usual hangout spot or less known places, there was absolutely no trace of her every square inch of the university. We then asked our professors, and they said the same thing. Her attendance report revealed that she had been absent the whole week. Things just kept getting weirder and weirder. Some of her close friends even contacted her family asking where she was, but none of them knew where she was either. We were really starting to get worried at this point, but we didn't want to start paying the ransom just yet. After all, the kidnappers could just keep increasing the price. Several reports were signed to the university, and eventually a missing person case was submitted to the police. It started off with campus security looking around and scanning for where she could be, but evolved to a full-on police warrant and search investigation. Even the cops were a bit stumped with the whole situation. They'd obviously seen kidnappings before, but asking for a ransom on an online platform, that wasn't exactly heard of. The police looked around the university themselves, but there was still no sign of her. Eventually, a warrant for the search of Rose's home was finally approved, and we all looked inside her dorm. The apartment seemed completely normal, but her essential items such as her pillows and laptop were all gone. From this, we concluded that she might have been kidnapped while she was leaving and going somewhere. The police took a look at the security footage and noticed that her car seemed to have left the parking lot the supposed day of the kidnapping. The investigation was just getting weirder and weirder. All of us were extremely worried. We knew that someone or the other would have the motivation to kidnap Rose. After all, she was a wealthy, famous, and attractive young woman. She interacted with people online on a daily basis. There had to be some sort of creep or psycho who wanted to harm her. People had already started submitting small amounts towards her ransom. They just didn't want to take that risk of leaving it be. A day later, and it was trending all over social media. #SaveRose. The story even hit county news. Everyone in a 20-mile radius started talking about this, and eventually the police started to work overtime. They felt with the amount of publicity this case was getting, it really wouldn't look good on their part if they didn't find her. Eventually, the state troopers got involved too, and they started looking for her as well. The search continued, and with it our worries. Eventually, the ransom was paid off. So many people had pitched in small amounts that the money goal was hit. Was she free? Would the kidnappers just keep raising the ransom price? A few hours went by, but there was still no answer from Rose. We were at the peak of our fear. Normally something would happen by now, right? But no, none of us got an answer. But that next day, everything was answered. A highway patrol officer spotted the vehicle that was registered to Rose. It also was reported missing at the time. He immediately turned on his lights and pulled the car over. That was it, the moment of truth. As he got up to the car door, the officer spotted Rose. He immediately took her out of the car and inspected it thoroughly, but she was the only one in it. The news hit us that Rose had been found, and she was taken back to the police station for questioning. All of us were relieved. We didn't understand the mysterious nature of her kidnapping, but at this point we were just glad that she was okay and back. But once again, things just kept getting stranger and stranger. Rose did not have a single scratch on her. The paramedics and investigators found no sign of any physical or mental trauma. Kidnapping victims would normally have either one of these. Rose was being rather evasive with the questions as well. She was overall vague about the situation and didn't seem spooked the slightest bit. But after even more question dodging, Rose was released. The investigation continued, but when she got back on campus, all of us were thrilled. We were just so worried for her. We had so many questions. Questions which Rose didn't seem to want to answer. We understood why. After all, she deserved some much-needed time to herself. I tried to ask her some more questions one-on-one when everyone left her apartment, but she seemed to still be acting odd. She avoided every single question in the weirdest way possible. I decided to call it a day and headed back to my room. As I continued my walk home, I couldn't stop thinking about it though. Everything about this whole situation was just so odd. And for Rose to come back like nothing even happened, it just contradicts everything I could even think of. But then, it struck me. The ransom, the lack of evidence, Rose's lack of answers, something deeper was happening, and it involved her. The next morning I got up, and my phone was flooded with notifications. Rose was arrested. According to various news sources and friends, Rose had faked the whole thing for money. Rose wanted to get some quick fame and cash and somehow thought that doing a fake kidnapping would be the answer. The reason that some of her essential items were missing was because she took them with her. She had left for some sort of beachside hotel. The location was remote enough to avoid suspicion, but not too close for comfort. She stayed there for a few days until the quote-unquote ransom was paid off. This explained everything. She was apparently caught after they tracked down all of the traffic cameras which spotted her car. They managed to find the location she had traveled to and back from. Rose was sued for all the ransom she collected, and lost even more than she gained in remaining lawsuits. She was charged with public mischief as well as false reporting. The charges stacked up to a high-level misdemeanor, and she was sentenced to a year in prison. My jaw was on the floor as I heard all of this. We were all so upset with her. So upset with ourselves. How could we really fall for this? How could she do such a thing? I still haven't heard from Rose, but the story is something that I will never forget. To this day, OnlyFans is something I'd never think of in the same light again. What I'm about to tell you is something that you probably won't even believe happened. Hell, not even in my wildest dreams did I fathom something like this occurring. I can't even put into words how awful my fear and anxiety was that day. Never in my life have I had to actually fear for my safety, but needless to say, I definitely will not be using OnlyFans ever again. This actually happened when OnlyFans was not that known. It was around 2017, which was 1 year after OnlyFans was founded. I came across a page which I was rather intrigued by on my Instagram feed. I stumbled across a very cute girl from my hometown, but I never really knew her. This was a time in my life where I was really introverted and rather socially awkward, so I had a lot of people added on my social media who I probably never even talked to. The only reason I even had Facebook and Instagram was to fit in as a college student. For reasons unknown, many very attractive women would always add me back on Instagram. I initially thought this was due to the fact that we had mutual friends or that I was just a very handsome man. But I eventually learned that following back was just a tactic to get more fame. It wasn't because of my charming looks. Now I was the kind of guy that would constantly like and comment under many hot girls' posts on Instagram. Some would call me a simp. Whenever I got a reply or like back from one of these women, I would immediately go to the PayPal or Cash App in their bio and leave them a huge tip with a thank you note. For some reason back then, this was my ego booster. I'm not exactly proud of this behavior today, but keep in mind that I was a rather different person back then. The sad part was my social anxiety prevented me from even DMing those girls. I didn't even try to make small talk with them. As sad as it is, I honestly expected these women to just ask me out and start giving me attention with all these donations I gave them. So with all of this in mind, you could imagine I was rather thrilled to see a new link in one of my favorite girls' bios. I immediately opened it and I was pleased with what I saw. The website was called OnlyFans, and now I could just subscribe and see any girl I want undress without having to constantly pay them and annoy them in the DMs. Even though I just found out another new money pit, I felt like I'd won $1 million. So I did what I'd naturally do, and I subscribed. I wanted to believe that I was her first subscriber, and it really did seem like it at first. Initially, she seemed a bit shy. She wasn't showing much of her body, and obviously this upset me. I was expecting a lot more for my $15 a month. What she was posting seemed to be things that you could just post on Instagram. There was no nudity whatsoever. No nipples, no nothing. But me being the simp I am, I thought if I somehow just kept the subscription, she'd notice me and eventually text me first. A few months went by and things seemed relatively normal. She started posting some decent nude photos, but somehow I wanted to see more. Aside from college, I was working at Starbucks, and I put all of my money into donations for her. I somehow felt that she was the one. I really thought that we would just go out one day and become lovers. But one day, I found out that OnlyFans had a new feature. Now, you could DM your OnlyFans model and get more intimate photos. All you had to do was make a photo request and they'd send a link with the payment. I was delighted. Now, I could get more intimate content, more than just nudes. So I mustered all the strength I could to text her, and I did. After all, getting some nudes was a good enough excuse to talk. I was shaking like never before. I really didn't know what to expect. But after a few minutes, she replied. We eventually started to actually get to know each other. I couldn't believe it. It was actually happening. It started off with her sending a few nude photos for about $100, but then asked me if I'm from the same city as her. After looking up my profile on Instagram with the same username, which happened to be my full name unfortunately, she realized that she had come across me a few times in public before. I was sweating and almost gave myself an anxiety attack. I didn't want her to find out who I am. Normally online, I'd give myself a name like one of my favorite video game characters, but this time, my browser automatically filled in my real first and last name, and I hit continue. I struggled to think of what to say. My mind was racing. She definitely had some mutual friends with me, and if they find out what I did online, they'd mock me endlessly at college. For some time, I tried to think of a way to escape the situation or leave the conversation, but I couldn't quite figure out anything. So I just answered with yes. From then on, we both got involved in an actual conversation. It turns out that she actually recognized me from college. She had seen me in person various times, and it turns out that one of her friends actually lives on the campus. We seem to have a lot in common, and we even realized that we were in the same place at the same time many times. We just never noticed each other. I was amazed. Never in my life did I think that I could have such a long and enduring conversation with someone, especially on OnlyFans. At this point, I was less interested in asking her for nudes, and more interested in asking her how her day went or how she was doing. It was almost like I finally had a genuine relationship with a girl for the first time in my life. I soon realized that money wasn't the way to win a girl, and the irony was she was spending way more time with me now than when I was spending money on her. But one day, she told me that I'm so nice that she wants to switch over to Instagram. She even let me know that I can call her and gave me her number. I was blown away. She really wanted to step up our relationship. I could finally get myself a real girlfriend. To be honest, I didn't even believe that this was possible. I genuinely thought I was just going to be single and behind a computer my whole life. Who knew I'd find my first girlfriend on OnlyFans? Things just kept getting better from then on. We were texting on Instagram for a while and I decided to actually call her. It was almost like I could feel a real connection with this woman. That was probably the first time I could call someone without getting a straight up panic attack. When we talked on the phone, it felt like we had the same personality. We were identical in so many ways. Her voice was just so pleasant and comforting, and we talked for hours during the next few days. I really thought that she would be the one. For the first time ever, I didn't want to wait any longer. I wanted to meet her in person as soon as possible. She was happy with the news and eventually invited me over to her house. We agreed on a proper date and time and hung up the phone. I felt like I was on top of the world. After years of criticizing myself and feeling like I wasn't good enough, I finally got one. I always thought that I needed to be like one of those Instagram fuckboys, but it turns out that casual nice guys like me do get a chance. The day of the date came, and I dressed myself up in my best clothes and went to a barber. I was so eager to meet her. I instantly booked an Uber and he took me to her neighborhood. When I was approaching her house, however, I noticed an awkward man standing behind a tree. He seemed really sketchy and had a hood on. I couldn't even see his face or eyes. Normally this would alarm me, but I was just so eager to go on a date with her that I shrugged it off. She opened the door and she was just as gorgeous as she was online, even prettier than I expected in person. She put her shoes on and we went for a walk. In the beginning it was a little awkward, but I eventually got over the moments of dead silence and started an actual conversation with her. She seemed a bit nervous too, but once we got the ball rolling, everything went well. We had a really good conversation and didn't stop talking till the end of the date. I eventually walked her home and we waved goodbye. But as I was leaving, when I turned my head around to see what was happening, I noticed the same exact weird guy from before. He was awkwardly approaching me, at first trying hard to hide it by looking around or avoiding eye contact, but eventually he was around 10 feet away, and there was no hiding this time. "Hey you," the man asked. Yeah, I replied. "Stop. Get over here." I stopped walking and turned around. Then he said, "Who are you to her?" Who am I to her? What kind of question was that? As I was trying to think of an answer, I looked back up at the man and noticed that he was getting insanely enraged. He had this crazed look in his eyes like he was about to hurt me or something. "You trying to hit on my girlfriend? Boy, you crossed a line," the man said. "What? I'm sorry, I think you're mistaking me for someone else. I really don't know what to say," I replied nervously. I started slowly backing away with my arm pushed out in front of me just for protection. I looked down at his hands and he had them both inside his hoodie front pocket. I saw his facial expression change from enraged to even more furious. He started breathing heavily and clenched his teeth in anger. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said. He then pulled out a gun from his front pocket and started firing it at me. I just fell on the sidewalk. I was in so much shock that I couldn't even feel any pain or take a breath. I just stared at him bluntly, adrenaline pumping through every ounce of my body. He then looked around and took off. After a few seconds, I let out a big, delayed scream. The adrenaline subsided and I felt like the worst pain in my life. I glanced around and I saw 2 big holes in the front of my knees. He shot me through both of my legs. I curled up in pain and started to black out. I was slowly drifting away and I completely lost consciousness. I woke up in the hospital, still in disbelief of what happened. My mom was sitting on a chair next to my bed asleep. She woke up quickly with a big smile and tears on her face. She explained to me what happened. One of the neighbors heard the gunshots and then spotted me in a puddle of blood. The guy that shot me had been taken into custody a few hours later. I had a few operations, but she told me that I would eventually walk after a long amount of time. I was devastated. I cried a lot that day. I asked myself why this could even happen. Why me? I could still feel the stabbing pain in my legs. It was unbearable. I couldn't sleep for the next few days. I could still feel the holes inside my knees, the bullets going into my leg. It was the worst pain of my life. I could barely move. That same day, I got a text from the girl I went on a date with, and it explained everything. The man was a subscriber to her OnlyFans like me. He also liked her and followed her on all social media. The only difference was the man was severely mentally ill, and he genuinely believed that she was his girlfriend. He often stalked her around town and somehow managed to track down her house. He was hiding there daily behind the trees and bushes, making sure no one else would come to her house. She didn't even know this until the cops brought out the neighbor's security camera footage. He really believed in some sort of imaginary relationship and really thought that she was cheating on him by going out with me. After a few months, my health got a bit better and I gained my knee strength a bit back. According to the doctors, my legs would never be the same. The medics said that the human body rarely recovers completely from gunshot wounds. and that I probably would never be able to run or be able to do any heavy activity on my legs for the rest of my life. I lost contact with the girl shortly after that. There was too many emotions tied with her, and there was no way I'm letting something like this happen again to me. She didn't seem to want to delete her OnlyFans account either, so both of us went our separate ways. I still don't know what happened to that man who shot me. Part of me feels bad for him and his condition, but the other half of me wants him to spend years in prison. I will never forgive him for the permanent damage to my legs. And that was the last time I ever went on OnlyFans.
This happened a few years ago. During my sophomore year of college, I suddenly had to switch dorms due to housing and residence life at my university being completely awful to me and a few other student workers. Long story short, I lost my job and I actually had to move within a day. My parents came 5 states away and made a huge fuss in the housing office so that I was able to get more moving time. This is really important later in the story. I used to go on Instagram Live a lot because I'm a music minor and practicing in front of an audience really helps me improve my piano skills. I guess Instagram had begun offering the feature of showing stories and lives on the Explore page, so I ended up getting a lot of views and comments from strangers. Nothing too bad. It was usually just song requests that I couldn't fulfill because I had a strict repertoire from my piano professor, or hard eyes from strangers. I used to really enjoy the lives until I got a comment from a man who knew exactly the location of my university. I never wore any kind of school attire during my lives or publicized my location on Instagram, so it made me a little nervous. I stopped doing lives after that for a while, getting caught up in regular work and figured everything was fine. The guy sent me a few messages offering to take me on a date. A quick scan of his profile made it clear that he was at least 50 years old. He worked as a laborer for the city my university is located near. He asked me several times a day what buildings my classes were in, if I liked the cafeteria, etc., until I finally got scared and decided to block him. However, before I blocked him, I called him a pervert and a freaking weirdo for being so interested in me when I was so much younger than him, and for also trying to find me when I was trying to go to class. A few weeks later, after I'd forgotten about his weird messages, I got a message from him saying something along the lines of, "I waited for you in front of your old dorm for hours, but you never showed. Did you go home for the weekend? You shouldn't be so rude to me next time, or else we won't have fun whenever we meet face to face." That message scared me more than I'd ever been scared in my life. One of my really close friends graduated from the university and began working as a campus police officer around the same time that this all happened. So I decided to go see her and see what I could do. Sadly, not much could really be done about it, but I definitely pulled back on my social media presence. The guy had followed me from 2 more Instagram accounts with different usernames, and I blocked all of them before he could even message me. Thankfully, since leaving after that spring semester, I haven't heard from him since. So to the creepy old guy from Instagram that wouldn't leave me alone, I really hope I don't hear from you ever again. When I was in the 8th to 10th grade, I was extremely involved in this small building server. The average age was probably about 15 to 17. And I joined a group of builders and Skyped with them every weekend for like hours. We all became close fast and we trusted each other, enough that we actually followed each other on Instagram. I became particularly close with one of the builders in my friend group named Peter. Peter was in the same grade as me and we ended up texting quite a lot. I had heard some rumors that Peter might have a crush on me, which he denied, which I kind of found laughable because, it was the internet, and I just brushed it off. Everything was fine for a while, until something began to feel really off whenever I talked to him. I was starting to constantly catch him telling these small lies. This really bothered me, so I figured it was time to distance myself from him and just stop talking to him altogether. Cut to a few months later of no contact, and Peter out of the blue sends me a text that he's going to be possibly transferring to my high school. He said he was doing this so he can get in-state tuition for college. Peter's plan was to somehow live completely alone and support himself while in high school. My stomach dropped when I read that text, and I just felt really off. I try to be calm, but also tell him that his plan is crazy. I tell him that it's oddly convenient that he chose my random suburb of all places. Peter just insists that his plan will work out and it's really just a coincidence that he's going to my high school. I'm trying to call Peter's bluff, hoping he's just screwing with me because I cut him off. Peter then says that he's already bought the plane tickets and he's going to stay in my town to go visit some high schools in the area. Fear washes over me. I begin to realize that Peter definitely has some really weird unhealthy attachment to me. Peter wasn't bluffing. To my horror, he posts a picture on Snapchat at the airport. Peter asked me to meet him up while he's there, but of course I decline. Later on, I see on his Snapchat story that he's actually taking a tour of my high school. He takes lots of videos and pictures and probably hoping I can see it. Luckily for me, I'm actually stuck home with pneumonia. I spend the next few days totally on edge and totally afraid that he was going to ring my doorbell at any moment. Luckily, he wasn't smart enough to find where I live, and he flies home and doesn't even follow his plan. The most baffling part? None of my old group on the Minecraft server even thought he was doing anything creepy. I honestly felt like I was going crazy for even thinking this was weird. I thought that my rejection for this meetup would be the end of it. But about 2 years later, I had just committed to my dream college. I still stupidly followed Peter on social media because I wanted some kind of warning if he was coming to my area again. Once again, Peter did. I see him posing right in front of the library at my college with the caption saying, "Transferring here is definitely the move." Cut to a few months later and Peter finds out that I had a boyfriend now, and he directly contacts me for the first time in like 2 years. He starts asking me strange questions like, "Is he gonna protect you?" I shouldn't have answered, but for some reason I did. I finally blocked him and out of fear, I decided to stop following him on social media. He hasn't tried to contact me since. I'm a 20-year-old girl and at the time of this story I was 15 years old. I had started to really grow on social media as a Twitch streamer / general personality. I used to be really into posting fitness and other progress pictures, along with my other selfies. I had a lot of dedicated followers and a lot of people that I didn't really know on social media, but I didn't really mind since it was part of my job now. Fast forward about 2 years and me and my current boyfriend at the time had just broken up. We were still on pretty good terms though. He sends me a text seemingly worried about some guy on Instagram who's asking for my nudes like insistingly. My heart dropped. The random guy who I recognize as one of my usual followers had sent my ex an entire gallery of photos of me. Not just a few pictures, but hundreds. Pictures that I deleted years ago, workout progress pictures which I had stopped posting for quite a while now, as well as selfies, videos, weird angles, stories, literally everything. Hundreds of photos of my underage self on his camera roll. I was absolutely petrified. I had to come to terms with this and I eventually blocked him and just tried my best to move on from this. A few days later, after coming out to my followers about my stalker, some of my closest friends and admins on Discord had messaged me privately. Apparently someone was going into my Discord and posting some of the unflattering progress photos amongst many others with no context. It was humiliating, because like I said prior, I had to come to terms with the fact that I really wanted to be more modest and feel more comfortable with myself, and well, this was a really hard setback for me. It was really sickening, but that wasn't even the worst of it. A couple of months later, I decided to Google my username. That same guy had posted my images to various sexual websites, and among other things, even 4chan forums. The captions were things like, "Hot young Latina," and so on. I want you all to keep in mind that I was only about 15 to 16 in these photos. I was luckily able to have them removed, but it's still so terrifying to think how some people can grow so obsessed with you. Please be mindful of what you post on social media. The thing that scares me the most though is just how many of these people exist in secret that we don't even know about. That's a really scary thing to think about. This story took place a few years ago. Since so many people are using online dating, I thought that I would share this story. During one summer when I was in high school, I was swiping through Tinder looking for someone to hang out with. I matched with this guy who seemed pretty nice and he looked really good. Lots of shirtless photos, if you know what I mean. He was a counselor at a local high school in the metro area. We texted for a while and talked on the phone and then decided to grab brunch in the next weekend. I met him at the restaurant and we ended up having brunch with bottomless mimosas. He was nice and funny and he really made me laugh a lot. I think that we both got a little tipsy. He said that he was going to go to a barbecue at his friend's house after the brunch and he asked me if I wanted to go with him. He seemed pretty cool to me and I was having a really good time with him, so I agreed. I had to walk my dog because I hadn't anticipated being out that long, so I told him I would meet him back at the restaurant in about 30 minutes. He said that he really wanted to meet my dog, and he asked if he could come walk the dog with me. I thought about it for a second, but my place was a total disaster, so I just told him no. I came back to the restaurant and we grabbed an Uber to his friend's house. There were a bunch of people there drinking and talking, and everyone was really nice. The barbecue situation was going on out back. We talked to some people, hung out, and then drank. He started to get kind of drunk and really handsy, so I told him I wanted a drink and walked into the kitchen for some space. A couple of minutes later, he comes into the kitchen and tries to kiss me. I kind of just smiled and just shrugged my way out of his grasp and told him I needed to go to the bathroom. I asked if he would grab me a drink and meet me outside in the backyard. When I left the restroom, I walked straight out the front door 2 blocks down and took a right. I grabbed an Uber home immediately. I started getting calls and texts from him, but I blocked him. He also tried to reach out over on social media, but I just blocked him on there as well. At this point, I pretty much totally forgot about him. Fast forward about 3 years now. I'm sitting on the couch chilling and reading through the local news on my phone. I scroll down a bit and I then see a picture of this guy's face. He had apparently been arrested for attacking women that he met on Tinder. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that I definitely dodged a bullet.
So back when all this Islamic State stuff was kicking off in Iraq and Syria, I remember a mate of mine sharing an Instagram account with me that was run by this group called the Peshmerga. They were like this militia made up of Kurdish fighters, ethnically distinct from Arabs but still Muslims. In spite of this, they were being prosecuted by those ISIS guys for some reason, so they were basically at war with them. They used to post all these combat videos, as well as pictures of themselves with captured ISIS equipment, weapons, ammunitions, vehicles, all sorts of stuff. They posted some pretty gnarly stuff, so I followed the account and naturally their stuff would pop up in my timeline every so often when I was scrolling. So this one day, I see a picture of them with someone I figured was a captured ISIS guy. He was all bloody and looking pretty sorry for himself, but the caption of the photo was in Kurdish, so obviously I couldn't tell what it all said. Thank God for Google Translate, because although the translation wasn't perfect, they did actually have a Kurdish option, so I could get an idea of what it said. Some of the words must have either been spelled wrong or they were using Kurdish slang, because some of the words just wouldn't compute, but like I said, I did get an idea of what the captions to the photo said, and as much as those ISIS dudes were or are scumbags, what I read was highly disturbing. I can't remember what the post said verbatim, but the words that did get translated were stuff like vote, mercy, kill, and then like a number of hours. It didn't take a genius to work out what those Peshmerga guys were proposing. They wanted their Insta followers to decide if that captured prisoner was to live or die. And then, as you can imagine, pretty much all the replies were just one-word replies that could be translated into yes, kill, do it, and that sort of thing. Only a handful pleaded with them not to do it, giving reasons like, "You be no worse than they are. We're not barbarians," and other variations on that theme. I remember being really shocked because the time period they gave was only like 2 or 3 hours, And even though the post had only been up for like a half hour, there were literally hundreds of comments all telling them to kill the guy. I remember sharing the post with a mate of mine who'd shown me the account in the first place. We spent hours going back and forth on how messed up it was, whether or not the prisoner deserved to be killed given what his jihadist buddies were doing. I mean, they were taking slaves, bringing back legit open-air slave markets with weeping and wailing women and girls, not to mention killing literally hundreds of innocent people in these mass executions out in the deserts. But in the end, I suppose it didn't matter a jot what we thought about it because, as we're talking, my mate shares a post with one of the shocked, appalled emoji things. You know, the ones that are yellow but also kind of blue? It was a photograph. A photo of the same prisoner whose picture had been posted just a few hours previously. He was lying in the dusty dirt with this vacant look on his face, with a puddle of blood pooling under his body. They'd done it. They'd killed him. On the orders of the general Instagram-using public. It sent a chill through me. I mean, like I said, I've no doubt that the guy deserved what he got, but knowing it was done in such a savage way, put to a vote, then when passed, even the people who were supposedly the good guys could prove to just be as bloodthirsty and merciless as the monsters they were fighting. We can't really judge either. The Kurds were being exterminated out there. How would you react if your people were being murdered or sold into slavery? You'd want to fight back too, and ferociously at that. The posts were taken down and the account was banned not long after, thankfully. Obviously, Instagram couldn't have something like that on their platform, but as quickly as the admins would delete an account, a brand new one would pop up and post the same images and votes. It didn't just happen one time. I saw execution votes just like the first one I'd seen, posted time and time again. I don't think I've ever looked at people in quite the same way since. Like, I know all that stuff was half a world away, but I think we can all agree that at their core, people are the same all over. We can be kind, generous, compassionate, but we all have it in us to be cold, bloodthirsty, and monstrous too.
This started towards the end of my 8th grade year. Basically, my friend had this guy who was following her Instagram, and he would comment on all of her posts telling her how pretty she was. Now, that wasn't super weird, but we found it kind of creepy because this dude was obviously in his late 50s, and she was only 13. He also started messaging her every day. Not anything overly creepy, just mainly small talk at first. Eventually, he finds my page and starts commenting on it, but I don't post pictures of myself online much, and basically all of it was just doodles and pictures of my dog. Now, this guy's account also mainly consisted of art, and most of it was actually pretty good, so I didn't really mind him commenting on my art at first. Eventually though, he also started messaging me and trying to talk to me as well. Now, I have pretty bad anxiety and I hate coming across as mean, so I wouldn't really respond with words unless he asked me a direct question. Mainly what I did was just send a heart or a smiley face. Stupid, I know. So this continues for a few weeks and I learned that this guy can randomly blow up. I learned this because I had responded to a message from him asking my age and I told him I was 13, and then I put my phone down because I had to do the dishes. When I came back to my phone, I had like 10 messages from him asking why I wasn't responding and also telling me that he was joking. I was super confused at first at what he could have sent that would have made me mad. Basically, he had responded about how both me and my friend looked like we were 18. I found that to be creepy, but I didn't want to confront him about it, so I told him it was fine and that I was just doing my chores. The conversation moved on, and I made an excuse to stop messaging him for the day. One really creepy thing he did was when I posted a picture of my grandma's dog, which is a corgi, and put the caption of how much I love that dog. He liked that photo, and then within a day or so later, he sends me a picture of a corgi that he drew for me. I thanked him for it, and then he asked me for my address so he could send it to me. I absolutely refused, but he kept asking me, telling me that it was a gift and that he wanted me to have it. I had to send a message explaining that it was a family rule and that I wasn't allowed to tell him my address. After that, he dropped it. Eventually, after a bunch of little creepy things, my friend finally blocked him, and so he started ranting about it to me. saying how she shouldn't be creeped out by him and he was just trying to be nice, and that if she had a problem with anything he was saying, she should have just told him. He basically continued on like that for the next few days. He then pointed out how he was following her backup account, and how he was going to start talking to her on that one. I immediately told my friend all about this, and she blocked him on her backup as well. I eventually stopped talking to him as well, and I also blocked him.
Jocelyn Khanna was born on March 14, 1990 in Anaheim, California, before being raised near Lake Elsinore. Jocelyn first started modeling for local magazines at the age of just 17 years old, but gained the majority of her fame when she was featured on the cover of Lowrider magazine. Jocelyn also featured in World Star Hip Hop's Valentine's Day special video and Gerardo Ortiz's music video for his single Y Me Besa, as well as a number of other magazines and music videos. This fame led Jocelyn to launch her own swimwear brand, using her popularity on Instagram to sell her products to her whopping 13 million followers. Her Instagram is very similar to what you might expect from a so-called influencer, a collection of semi-naked pictures of herself, complete with several cataloging her extensive travels around the United States and Latin America, in a private jet no less, attending various modeling events in New York and Los Angeles. She was also famous for her rather rotund posterior, giving rise to her nickname of the Mexican Kim Kardashian. But Jocelyn apparently had the brains to complement her beauty, with her LinkedIn profile stating that she had studied microbiology at San Diego State University. She had smarts and good looks, with conservative estimates of her income suggesting she was making upwards of $100,000 from various sponsorships and swimwear sales. But for Jocelyn, it was simply not enough. So in December of 2020, Jocelyn booked herself an appointment with a plastic surgeon down in Colombia to undergo what has been referred to as a Brazilian butt lift. During so-called Brazilian butt lift procedures, fat is taken from various parts of the body and essentially molded into the buttocks to give them the appearance of being larger. The procedure has grown increasingly popular in the United States, fast becoming the most popular type of plastic surgery, according to 2015 statistics from the American Society of Plastic Surgeons. The rate of buttock lift procedures rose over 200% from 2000 to 2015, with the total number of surgeries rising from 1,356 to 4,767 procedures over the course of that time. Yet, injecting fat into the buttocks can lead to severe problems if done improperly, including fat embolism, a process in which fat enters the bloodstream and blocks a blood vessel. Jocelyn's butt lift was due to take place in early December, but around that same time, news of her tragic death seemed to emerge. The cause of death has not been confirmed by her family, but Instagram influencer Lyra Mercer was apparently privy to the reasons behind her demise, and tweeting out on December 7th, "OMG, Jocelyn Kano died in Colombia getting surgery. That's wild." A 3-hour live stream of what is believed to be her funeral was shown on YouTube, which saw loved ones paying their respects to the young woman in a casket beside a large picture of her. Attendance was small and intimate, mainly due to the pandemic, but watching the live stream, we can see that Jocelyn's family was absolutely devastated by the news of her death, and that she is survived by 2 young children. The estimated death rate for Brazilian butt lifts is 1 in 3,000, according to PlasticSurgery.com, and it seems likely that Jocelyn's death was a result of complications following the surgery, becoming one of the unlucky few unable to survive such a procedure. Others wonder why representatives for Kano's brand have not confirmed the news, with one follower complaining that, considering the brand is hers, at least it carries her name, y'all should make a statement. I mean, she had over 12 million followers after all. The lack of confirmation has only fueled the rumors that Jocelyn did indeed die as a result of the Brazilian butt lift procedure, and that those now in charge of her company feel that the way in which she died might damage her brand. After all, they too are profiting from the sense of vanity that has risen as a result of superficial Instagram influencer culture. Last year, an online news publication reported on a shocking rise in black market butt lifts, inspired in part by so-called Snapchat dysmorphia, the condition of being out of touch with one's own physique as a result of constant exposure to highly edited or modified bodies on social media. It's been widely reported that varieties of beauty-based social media have been extremely damaging to female mental health, putting unrealistic expectations on them to look or live in a particular way. But it seems that the same is true for their physical health too, with surgical shortcuts to certain body types having literally killed a handful of young women over the past few years. I think we can all agree that it is frankly terrifying that such pressures can be felt so deeply by women that they would choose to risk their lives to attain a certain societal standard of beauty. And that smart, successful people can be so heavily affected by what they see online that they opt for what are obviously dangerous surgical procedures. Jocelyn Cano didn't have to die, that much is clear. But the question is how many other young women will have to lose their lives before we learn to love what we're born with naturally, instead of pining after some unattainable standard, and how much blood is on our hands for allowing such a standard to exist in the first place.
So, a long time ago, I had a falling out with one of my friends who liked to cyber harass people she didn't like. Because I knew this, I took precautions on all of my social medias and added the two-step verification where it would send codes to your cell phone if someone tried to log in or change your password. Seems like a safe step, right? I never really thought about it any further until a few days ago. I get an SMS text from a random number that addressed me by my full first name. It freaked me out a little because the spelling of my first name is pretty uncommon from where I'm from. No big deal. Maybe it's just an old friend who changed phones. I gave the classic, "Who dis?" back at them, to which I received an even stranger text back. "Oh my goodness, it's you. Are you 18? I have something I want to cash app you." Well, that's weird, I thought to myself. Probably just some scam to hack my cash app. I said again, "Who is this?" I never received a text back from that number. No less than 5 minutes later, I get 3 calls and 2 spam voicemails from different and unrecognized phone numbers. Then I get a text telling me to pick up the phone and saying my name. Now, that's pretty alarming. I immediately took screenshots and I had my boyfriend call from his phone, but no luck. I blocked the number and I hoped that was it. Maybe about 30 minutes later, I get 5 phone calls from a new number and a new, even more alarming set of texts. "I'm a 40-year-old man and I'm in love with you. I will keep trying to reach you until you respond. I won't stop." I immediately blocked the number and then called my parents. Then within about 2 minutes, he made a new number and texted me again. "Wow, I just want to talk to you for 5 minutes. I'll even pay you, but after that, consider me gone." Again, I just blocked him. I alerted my boss, then the text stopped. After work, I filed a police report and bought a baseball bat. My first instinct was that it was a guy I recently worked with who had been recently fired for harassment. One of my friends/coworkers who was good with the tech staff changed his phone number and texted the number pretending to be me or Burner to get some more information out of him. It was a bit of a long conversation, so I'll sum it up by saying that this guy basically wanted to talk to me on the phone while he masturbated. He called me 26 times and got no answer, so he eventually stopped trying. We assumed that was the end of it. The next morning, I get a text from a new number yet again. He was claiming to be one of my friend's fathers. I started to freak out. Both my parents and my boyfriend were at work, so he sent his mom over to calm me down and stay with me while I was alone in my apartment. He called my phone and she answered it, and all he said in this super creepy raspy voice is, "Please," and then abruptly hung up. I was having a full-blown panic attack at this point. We called the police department and they had an officer come out to update my report. She was still texting the guy while the cop was there. Once she told him law enforcement had been contacted, his whole story completely changed. He said that he doesn't know me or anything about me. He doesn't even live near me and means no physical harm. He's just a lonely guy who got my phone number from Facebook and decided to harass me. I might remember this wrong, but I could have sworn I had my phone number set to private, but I know I still had it up there because of the two-step verification, I recently posted something on Facebook Market, so I'm assuming that's where he found me. I have since deleted that account and changed my phone number, and nothing else has happened. Posting this here is more or less a warning to anyone who has that two-step verification set up. Please double check and make sure that you have the most private settings as possible for everything. I'm not even going to set up all that stuff with my new phone number. I'm not going to risk giving it out anywhere online.
This story happened when I moved back to Tokyo from the US in 2016. I'm originally from Japan, but my parents and I moved to the United States when I was just 6 years old. On the first day in a new high school, I was really shy and I was rather new to the community. I considered myself a rather shy person. I was a kid in a new area. It was the first day of school, and I sat down on an appropriate-looking school bench and looked around me. I instantly noticed a girl waving and walking towards me. Her name was Ami, and we would soon become great friends in the future. She later introduced me to her friend group, and I liked them instantly. They were very positive and extremely nice to me. Their names were Suki and Rumiko. Before I knew it, I had already found myself a new home. It felt like I was living there my whole life. One sunny day, we were having a picnic during our lunch break. Eventually, the conversation shifted towards urban legends. Suki started telling us about these, and she said they were allegedly real. She told us a scary story about a girl who appeared to be cut in half. Many people reported seeing her at night. Essentially, people claimed they saw a ghost girl with her guts hanging visibly out of her body. While this obviously terrified me, I was always the skeptical kind towards folklore and legends. I personally believed that they were just made for children to behave or something to scare people with. Suki eventually asked her grandfather about the story, and he explained it to her. Apparently, this thing was called the teke teke. Legend had it that a girl was murdered by her classmates on a railroad. Her body was cut in half when they left her on the rails, and a train ran her over. And now, the ghost haunts people who walk by railroads at night. Suki eventually told us this, and there was a short silence. We all looked at each other and laughed out loud, except for Suki. She was dead serious. I told her that she'd been watching too many horror movies, and that things like this just don't exist in real life. We giggled a bit more, but Suki's face remained stone cold. She really believed it. I commended Suki's efforts to scare us, but let her know promptly that she failed. She rolled her eyes, and she seemed visibly upset. I knew she was a big fan of this stuff, but I never thought she'd believe it. She then told us, "Okay, if you girls are so sure that it's fake, why don't we go test it ourselves? We don't have anything to lose, right?" My laughter stopped immediately. While I didn't believe in the legends, I was still hesitant to go out in the middle of the night to some abandoned area. I was willing to prove that ghosts didn't exist, but not that badly. I had no problem proving Suki wrong, but crazy people and animals in the middle of the night were an actual threat. So, are we going to some abandoned canal or sketchy location to prove this? I asked Suki. "No, the trial will take place in our school," Suki said. I let out a sigh of relief. I mean, it was our school. We've all been there before, and there's plenty of people at all hours. "So, what will we do?" I asked Suki. Suki told us that we would be trying to summon a girl named Hanako-san. The urban legend regarded a girl who committed suicide on the third stall of the third floor of her school. We would have to enter that stall of our school, say her name, and punch 3 times on the stall doors. Then, she might appear. We decided to meet after our extracurricular activities in a third-floor toilet at around 7 p.m. For context, I joined a few classes where I volunteered to help my art teachers at school. It was a great way to spend my free evenings. Making origami and hanging out with people my age beat being bored at home any day. The extracurricular itself ended at around 7 p.m., so it was a perfect time to meet with the girls in the bathroom. There really weren't going to be any kids to bother us, and the school was technically open at this time. And so we proceeded with our plan. Roughly after 7 p.m., we met in the toilet. Suki had already prepared a few candles and warned us not to turn on any lights. She had her hood up. It was already giving me the creeps. We stood in a circle and looked at each other with straight faces. It was starting to look like some sort of cult. At this point, I was already getting creeped out. She rose her finger to her mouth and let us know that we were supposed to be silent during this whole time. She then took a red pencil out of her bag and drew something on the third stall. She told us quietly to hold each other's hands, and we did. We held each other's hands tightly, and Suki started mumbling something under her breath. She then said loudly 3 times, "Hanako-san, can you hear me?" I closed my eyes out of fear. At this point, I even started to doubt myself and believe that something might actually appear. My heart was racing and my palms were sweaty. My legs started to give out. I slowly opened my eyes. Nothing was there. Suki tried a few more times, but after a few more minutes she gave up and we left the stall. I was beyond relieved. Nothing happened. I looked at the other girls and they seemed a bit spooked but relieved as well. Suki finally gave in and said maybe we were right. She put out the candles and we packed our stuff and left. It was already dark outside and I knew my mom would be mad. I forgot to text her earlier that I would be later than usual. When we left school, I tried to reach inside my backpack and find my phone to text my mom. I shuffled around, but it wasn't there. Damn it, I must have left it on the windowsill of the bathroom. I looked up at that bathroom window, and the thought of going back in there sent chills up my spine. I eventually excused my friends and ran into the building. There was no one there except for me and the janitor working the late shift. I went up the stairs and slowly went by the bathroom doors. There was a dead silence by the opening. No lights were on. I was afraid to go in there. I heard a rumbling noise from the inside. No way I'm going in there, I told myself. But I stopped for a second and thought about it. I'm not gonna leave my phone in there. If I allow that to happen, someone's just gonna take it the next day. And what, I'm gonna allow that to happen because of something fake? And what would I tell to my mom after losing a $1,000 phone? No way. I'm going in. I walked in and saw my phone straight away at the end of the bathroom. I tried turning on a light, but it wasn't working. That's weird. I had no time to waste, so I ran quickly to get my phone. I was happy to have it. But before I turned around and waved to my friends outside, I heard a thudding sound behind me. This time, twice as loud. It was coming from the third stall. I was paralyzed by fear. I looked up and down the stall and spotted a brown robe swinging over it. There was blood coming out from the bottom of it. I didn't want to see anything more. I ran out of the toilet as fast as I could, never even thinking about looking back. I told no one about it and tried to block it from my mind. If it really happened, this would destroy my mental health and the perception of my world. It couldn't be true. I couldn't have seen a real ghost. It can't be. As I came back home, I tried to go to sleep, but I couldn't close my eyes. I was so afraid she would come to me. I was up all night on guard, looking around my room. I even had a nightstand lamp turned on because I couldn't see the whole room clearly. I felt like a wreck the next day. My mom tried to ask me what's wrong. I looked so tired and paranoid, but I didn't speak a word to her during breakfast. I was paranoid and terrified of the thought of going to my first class. It was on the 3rd floor. But what I saw as I walked up the stairs was somehow even more petrifying. The toilet doors were blocked by a few police officers, and around them was yellow police tape. One of my friends approached me and told me about a horrific incident. Apparently, a lower grade girl committed suicide yesterday right after we left the bathroom. She waited for us to leave and then attempted to cut her wrist. That didn't work, so she hung herself. It then clicked, and I realized what I saw last night. It wasn't a ghost. It was a person. I was an eyewitness to that girl taking her own life, and I did nothing. I couldn't believe I just ran away in anticipation of it being a ghost. I burst into tears, still telling no one that I was there. Afraid of the consequences, I just told my friends that she must have came in there after I retrieved my phone. It may not be a ghost, but the guilt of what happened that night will haunt me for the rest of my life. I always considered myself to be a low-risk type of person. I never really had gotten into any super dangerous or life-threatening situation. But that changed 4 summers ago. You'll believe me by the end of the story when I tell you that this experience changed my life forever. We were just let out on break by our school, and my friends were eager to go and do something stupid as usual. I was the responsible one of the group, if you will. It was honestly quite surprising that I even hung out with these adrenaline junkies. I was never a risk taker. I would always consider the consequences to my action before I took them. Many times, I was the balancing factor to my friends' crazy antics. Despite this, I loved hanging out with them. The dynamic of them encouraging me to try new things and push me out of my comfort zone was something I never really could find in other people. But when I turned 18, peer pressure started skyrocketing. I felt like I was somehow missing out on something, that I was living my early years of life in fear. This, combined with the people I was hanging out with, brought me to make some really irrational decisions. Whether that be shoplifting or driving with them at incredibly high speeds, I caught myself constantly trying out new, irresponsible decisions. This tolerance towards doing stupid things is what I largely blame for what happened to me. Summertime hit and the temperature was starting to skyrocket. While most teenagers went to a friend or neighbor's pool to swim, we wanted to try something a little different. There was a nearby water reserve which was strictly prohibited to swim in. During the daytime, security patrolled the area and made sure no one jumped in that water. But at nighttime, it was open to anyone brave enough to swim among the various dangerous fish over there. My friends wanted to go there and take a dip with me, cool off during the hot Korean night. Rumor had it that the lake was haunted and that a lot of sketchy things have happened there. This of course only strengthened our urge to go there and take a swim late at night. Of course I was hesitant at first, but as peer pressure crept in, I went along with it. We arrived at the lake around midnight. We were already in our swimsuits. There were some lights around the complex, but the lake was pitch dark. It was impossible to see where you were even swimming or standing or how deep the water was. Any of the said large marine life in the lake were going to be impossible to spot. This really frightened me. Sure, I was opening up to taking new risks, but this was really pushing that as well. After a lot of convincing from my friends, we all headed to the lake. One of my friends guided us through the shrubs. We used a large pocket knife to cut down the leaves and somehow make our way through the fence. When we got to the lake, I reluctantly got in. It really wasn't that bad at first. The water was quite nice and it was a lot of fun swimming in the dark with my friends. We kept swimming around for about 15 minutes while cracking jokes and making fun of each other. But as we were swimming, I noticed something, specifically someone out in the distance. I saw a mystic white figure out in the distance. It quickly faded away in the water. I shrugged it off as maybe just some light reflecting and kept swimming. Eventually, my friends wanted to do a dare and see who would go out farthest in the lake at night. Not being in my best decision-making mindset, I agreed, but I made sure to stay relatively close to the shore and grab onto a small concrete wall. Something deep inside me still felt off about the whole idea, but I went through with it. We all swam as far as we could. Several of my friends stopped halfway. The water was several meters deep at this point. At that point, it was just me and two of my other friends in the lake. We started swimming back, but as I was heading back, I noticed something under the water. It seemed to be a person under there. I looked closer at what it could possibly be and felt a tugging on my foot. I tried to look around and see what was happening, but the tugging just got harder and harder. I tried to wriggle out and see what could be doing this. Was I stuck on something? Why was it pulling me downwards? At this point, I was screaming and panicking. My friends noticed and started quickly swimming towards me. I tried grabbing at my feet, but something pushed my hands away. At this point, my head was completely under the water. I was losing oxygen, and I was losing it fast. My life was flashing before me, confusion and fear running through my mind, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I tried to make sense of the situation, but I couldn't. There was no way this was some large fish or lake shark. It felt like a human arm was pulling at my ankle downwards. My friends were trying to pull me up towards the surface, but it was no use. I even felt some of my friends trying to kick down or thrash at whatever was pulling me down, but even that didn't work. Eventually, I felt a sharp pain at my foot and started to black out, still confused as to who or what was trying to drown me. I woke up at the hospital a day later, completely unaware of my surroundings. Part of me wanted to believe that this was some sort of bad dream. As I started to panic and try and leave the bed, a nurse and doctor walked in along with some of my friends and they calmed me down. They explained to me everything that happened. I asked them what was pulling me down in the lake and they didn't have a clear answer. The doctors and nurses said it was most likely some sort of lake shark or predatory fish. Apparently they can get very large and extremely heavy and are certainly powerful enough to yank down a person of my size. But that's when I asked them, how exactly did they get me out of the water? The nurse looked down at my foot and that's when I noticed it. Most of my foot was removed. All of my toes were gone and the side of my foot was mutilated. I turned pale. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to see it. The nurse explained to me that my friends had to use the large pocket knife they had on hand and cut a large part of my foot off in order to save me. She said I would most likely have died if they didn't do so, as those fish don't tend to let go of their jaws. I was devastated and in complete disbelief. A few days later, my friends checked in on me to see how I was doing. We eventually discussed what happened. My friend explained to me that when they rushed towards me, they saw what seemed to be a human hand pulling me down in the water. They tried pulling me, but the arm was just too powerful. They even tried hitting at it or cutting it, but it didn't seem to work. As a last resort, they had to amputate part of my foot. They explained to me the legend of the Mulguishin. As per Korean legend, vengeful spirits that were taken from this world too early often sought violent actions against unsuspecting victims. The lake we were swimming at was apparently a common spot for the mafia to execute people and dump their bodies too. They often lurk where their bodies are left and try and subject people to the same form of death. In the case of a water ghost, they drag you down and never let go. This explained everything. The person I saw in the distance, the ghostly silhouette in the water, the feeling of the human hand on my ankle. My friends tried to explain to the police and doctors that this was some sort of paranormal activity and that it didn't look like a fish at all. But the emergency services obviously did not believe us. As indicated by the signs around the lake, this area was known for large and aggressive marine life, and to them that was the most reasonable explanation. After all, why would they believe a group of trespassing teenagers? Currently, I walk with a prosthetic. I still get nightmares about what happened that night. My foot is a painful reminder every day of what happened to me and how I could have avoided it. We should never have gone in there in the first place. To this day, I still do believe that I was attacked by some sort of paranormal being, and that night will haunt me till the day I die. I'm an American citizen, but my family is from the South Asian country of Bengal. I loved spending time with my friends in the States, but I really enjoyed visiting my extended family back east. I worked at a business firm, and I handled a lot of information sciences there. It was a well-paying but tedious job. I rarely took breaks, but my manager was kind enough to let me get a couple weeks off of work every year. Those precious free weeks I had were taken up by a variety of activities. It was between going on vacation, chilling at home, or visiting my family back in Bangladesh. This year, the executives decided to give my branch a 1-week break over spring. But this break was going to be special. It had been more than 2 years since I'd last seen my greater family, and I really missed them. I instantly booked a ticket to Dhaka International Airport, packed my bags, and was en route the next day. When I arrived to the capital city, I swung by some old friends and we hung out a little. My old friends lived in the heart of the capital, but my family, on the other hand, well, they were in a not-so-urban area. While my parents moved to the large city when I was rather young, my grandparents, uncles, and aunts stayed in a small town northwest of the capital. The town was rural, but it was beautiful. It had a population of about 15,000 at the time, and it was a sparsely populated area. The town comprised of a set of homes, a school, a few shops, and mostly forest between them. It was a very remote region, and it didn't have all the facilities someone from a developed nation would consider normal. The electricity was unreliable, the tap water wasn't clean, and the internet cut out most often. But in my eyes, the lack of comfort was worth it. People were very nice and the community was tightly knit. I could consider almost anyone there family. So I hopped on a bus and headed over there. It was a long and bumpy ride, but I got there in one piece. After years, I was finally reunited with my family. The village was just as beautiful as it was. At the door, I was greeted by my sister, my cousin Babel, my family dog, my mother, and my Aunt Tara. She happened to be visiting from a neighboring village. Now don't get me wrong, I love my family and it's always a blast seeing them. But my Aunt Tara was a bit odd, we'll say. Aunt Tara was a strong believer in superstitions and spiritual things. The things she'd say or try to make us do were extremely bizarre sometimes. She was seemingly a nice person, but was difficult to spend time with. She had a few quirks, if I can put it shortly. She would always tell us these terrifying ghost stories when we were kids, but most of the time, they weren't even for fun. She was serious. After catching up with my family, we quickly stepped inside and I unpacked my bags. But as I was unpacking, I felt a pair of eyes on me. It was my aunt. Sure, she was an oddball, but this was weird even for her. "Are you okay, Auntie?" I asked. She kept staring for a bit longer, but snapped out of it. "I'm fine," she said. "But the presence around us isn't," she continued. I was taken aback. I honestly thought she was done with this spiritual nonsense. "I sense a disturbance in the spirits among us. There are malicious souls and I sense them nearby," she continued. Okay, Auntie, I'll bear that in mind," I replied, trying to make the conversation a bit less awkward. "Be careful, and don't go out at night. Find a nearby shrine if you feel watched." She abruptly walked away. At this point, I was more annoyed than scared. I was honestly reluctant to even stay the night if she continued these antics. My thought was interrupted by my mom calling us out for dinner. Her food was delicious, so naturally I rushed over to the dining room. But as we were eating, my aunt was still acting strange. She had a sort of pendant necklace with a holy symbol on it. Every time we tried to include her in the conversation or asked her anything, she'd passively change the topic. She seemed very suspicious of something. We eventually just ignored her behavior and continued with our nights. But as I was about to sleep, my aunt knocked on my door. She told me once again to not step out at night and that she was very worried for our safety. I couldn't believe it. She's still droning on about these spirits. I just shut the door and ignored her. I tried my best to go to sleep, but my jet lag was keeping me up. Bangladesh was about 13 hours ahead of the US West Coast, and my body clock was completely flipped. I tried watching some videos on my phone in hopes of passing time, but the internet eventually cut out and it was just me alone in a dark room. I thought about going out on a night walk, but then remembered what my aunt said. I didn't believe in that stuff, but part of me was telling me that it may actually be a bad idea going out at this hour. But my boredom was getting to me, and I said hell with it. My dog awoke to the sound of me stepping outside and started acting up. At first I thought he was just cranky and tired, but he seemed to growl at me as I got closer to the door. That was odd. I ventured out anyways. As I stepped out, I felt the crisp air hit my skin. The village didn't have many streetlights and it was all engulfed in forest. There was a trail over to the side of the street my house was on and I proceeded through there. At first, nothing unusual seemed to be occurring. The sound of the crickets roared as I walked through the wilderness on a dirt path. But as I was walking, I felt watched. I tried to shrug it off as my aunt getting to me, but I almost felt a chill going up my spine. I kept hearing a loud voice coming from a distance behind me. It seemed to be an owl. But as the hooting of the owl got closer and closer, there seemed to be something seriously wrong with it. The owl hoots were almost human. The sounds the owl made kept switching back and forth from an actual owl to what seemed to be a person impersonating one. The hooting got louder and louder, but I never noticed an owl in sight. I surveyed my surroundings and saw a misty black figure in the shadows. It quickly vanished behind a tree. I kept scanning up and down the trees to find out what was around me, and I noticed a silhouette of an owl in a tree, but as I blinked, it disappeared again. What was happening? Was it my eyes still adjusting to the dark? Maybe my jet lag was getting to me. The hooting suddenly stopped, and the forest was dead silent. My breath sounded like a roar. I slowly looked over my shoulder only to see it. In the darkness, I made out an owl sitting in a tree. The owl somehow morphed itself into a shadowy humanoid ghost form. I couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't want to believe my eyes. The misty creature slowly morphed around and started shifting from tree to tree, getting closer to me. At this point, I sprinted. I sprinted as hard as I could, adrenaline rushing through every ounce of my body. I heard the hooting start again behind me, this time like it was angry. I kept sprinting out of the woods. I ran. I looked towards my parents' house. I couldn't think of anywhere else I could hide. When I got to my house, before I could even say anything, my aunt was waiting by the front door. She dragged me in. The creature was still following me. I could hear voices at the edge of the forest where my house was. My aunt quickly took me over to our house's shrine and kept me there between a few idols. I waited and waited, confused and terrified. Eventually, the sun rose. I somehow mustered the strength to step out of the prayer room. My aunt was waiting outside the door. I explained to her everything that happened. The owl, the noises, the weird misty figure, and how it somehow chased me home. She explained to me that I was very lucky to be alive, and that I'd encountered something called a penchapechi. Penchapechis are a form of unsatisfied or malicious spirits that haunt the forests of Bengal. They take the form of owls and follow travelers in the woods until they're alone and cornered. The ghost would then consume its prey like a zombie and continue to its next victim. She said that she felt the presence of many angry or ill-intended spirits in the area. She felt a rise in these ghosts were most likely due to the flood in a neighboring region that killed many people. The spirits of those people did not feel satisfied with their lives. Most of them died far too young and continued to live in the afterlife as ghosts. That story occurred about a year back, and I haven't gone back since. But if I do, I will definitely listen to my aunt.
I had just moved into a new apartment, and being the broke post-grad I was, I had pretty much nothing except a few boxes of stuff from my parents' house. It was nice to be done with school and have my own place, yeah, but I didn't even have any furniture. Like I said, I was completely broke, so I thought maybe I'd be able to find something at least decent on the free section of Facebook Marketplace. If you've ever searched for furniture on Facebook Marketplace, you know it's not great. Half the couches there are held up with duct tape or something along those lines. I knew I couldn't be picky, but I wanted something that could at least last me until I had enough money to buy a nice one. I'd been scrolling for well over an hour, and was probably already a week into the backlogs. I scrolled back to the top and refreshed the page. The second I did, I saw an ad pop up titled, "Brand new couch, never used, free for pickup." The post wasn't even a minute old, and I knew I had to be quick if I was going to have a chance at getting this thing. The couch was in perfect condition. I quickly typed out a response to the seller, saying I'd be willing to take it off their hands. I got a response not even 3 minutes later that read, "Yeah, the couch is all yours if you can come pick it up tonight. I'm available anytime past 9 p.m. I was slightly put off by the response. It was currently noon, and this guy wanted me to wait till 9 p.m. to pick it up, way past when the sun would have gone down. But I ignored it, thinking maybe the guy had work till then or something. So I texted him back saying that was fine, and proceeded to wait. Come 8:30, and I sent over a text to the guy saying I was on my way. I typed in the guy's address, and quickly realized the guy lived in the middle of nowhere. Now, I live right next to the Rocky Mountains, so yeah, there aren't that many people nearby, but this guy was seriously in the middle of nowhere. My GPS said it would take 45 minutes to get there, so I quickly set off. As I drove, the housing development slowly became less and less frequent. My GPS eventually took me on these really sketchy one-way dirt roads. About 10 minutes later, it said I arrived. Sure enough, there was an actually decent-looking house, but there was no other civilization for at least a few miles. Somehow I had service and was able to send out a text telling the guy I was there. Not even 10 seconds later, I got a response simply saying okay. I figured that was this guy's way of telling me he was ready, so I walked up to the front door. I knocked on the door, to which someone responded in a muffled voice. "The door's unlocked. Come on in." From the way the voice sounded, it was as if whoever said it was right on the other side of the door. I opened the door and peeked inside before entering. I quickly realized how weird this situation was. The place was pitch black, with not a single light on. Now, this was before every cell phone had a flashlight on it, so literally all I could use to help me see was the moonlight shining in from one of the windows. I yelled out a hello, to which I could hear someone responding from a door on my left that was open, and I could tell it led to a basement. The voice said, "Come on down here. I got the couch ready to be moved." At this point, I was completely on edge. I replied, saying, No, that's okay. I gotta go." I turned around, swung open the front door, and started running back to my car. I unlocked it, got in, and proceeded to relock the doors. I gave one last glance at the house before leaving. No one had chased me, though through one of the windows I could see the dark outlines of 4 different men just looking out at my car. I booked it out of there at that point, and drove straight back to my apartment. When I got back, I checked my phone to see I had 3 new messages from the guy's number. The first one asked why I left, followed by one asking if I still wanted the couch. But the third one is what disturbs me most. It simply read, "You're lucky." This is by far the most disturbing experience of my life, and has caused me to never use Facebook Marketplace or anything similar again. To this day, I'm convinced those guys in that house that night never had the intention to sell me a couch. A few weeks ago, I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to before in order to look for a place to live at for school. I was flying alone. Though before the trip, I had researched all sorts of apartments in the area on Facebook Marketplace, and was actually able to set up a few meetings to look at places. The first meeting was in the late afternoon, in a sort of remote residential area. The landlord sounded fine over email, and asked me to call him an hour before meeting him to confirm I was coming. And so I did just that. I called him an hour before, but he didn't answer. I decided to just start walking to the house, and hope the landlord would show up by the time I got there. About an hour later, the guy called me. He asked me if I was still coming, to which I replied, "Yeah, I'm actually only about 5 minutes away." Though, the guy's reply caught me completely off guard. He replied, furious, saying I wasn't supposed to show up for another hour. I quickly realized he was right. Back then, I had a pretty old phone. It wouldn't automatically change times whenever you switch time zones. I forgot to change it manually, and realized I was showing up an hour early. I explained the situation to the guy over the phone, but I could tell the dude was furious. Now, I get I was in the wrong, but still, getting that mad over something as small as this seemed weird to me. I explained to the guy I'd be willing to just stay outside of the house till the agreed upon time, to which he quickly replied saying no, almost pleading with me. At this point, alarms were going off in my head, but I ignored them as I really needed a place to live. I decided I'd just go get some food at a nearby place to pass the time, until I needed to be at the house for the tour. Once the time came for the tour, I showed up to meet the guy. The guy looked to be in his 50s, and if I'm being honest, he looked disgusting. Some of his clothes were half torn, and it didn't even look like he'd showered for weeks. I didn't feel comfortable, and found myself just wanting to leave. Though, like I said, I really needed to find somewhere to live, and there weren't that many choices in terms of real estate at that point, so I decided to stay. As I was discussing the details about the house with the guy, I couldn't help but notice a man leave the house from a back exit. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking, even more so than the guy I was talking to. He took one look at us, ran out of the house to his car, and pulled away. At this point, I was full on disturbed. I asked the guy who that was, to which he replied it was another person he was giving a tour to earlier. The guy then proceeded to ask me a lot of questions. They weren't normal questions a landlord would ask, but rather more personal questions like how old I was, or what I was going to school for, the whole time staring into my eyes without blinking. I tried to give answers that were as vague as possible. Finally, we entered the house. Now, from the outside, the house actually looked decent, but upon entering, you could tell the place wasn't taken good care of. I followed the guy as we walked around the house looking at all the rooms. Every time I would ask about the condition of the house, the guy would avoid the question, simply saying it was unfinished. After we finished looking at all the rooms, the guy mentioned he wanted to show me a shed in the backyard of the house. Before I could say anything, the guy told me to follow him as he led me to the back of the house outside away from the street, to this sort of detached shed. When we got there, he opened the door and I quickly noticed that there were stairs leading down into utter darkness. He flipped on a switch at the top of the stairs, but no light came on. Normally, the response for this would be surprise, or something like that, but he didn't say anything, and just started slowly walking down into the utter darkness, as if he expected no light to come on. The guy was now just standing there at the bottom of the stairs, in the dark, and said, "Aren't you coming down?" I said nothing, still in shock that the landlord wanted me to follow him down into this dark basement cut off from the rest of the house. For whatever reason, I glanced back at the house and saw another guy in the backyard doorway. I panicked and ran into the woods. I didn't look back, and honestly I didn't want to. I don't know if they followed me, but after about a half mile of running, I turned around to find no one. I quickly realized the situation I was in. I was in the middle of the forest at sunset, with people possibly chasing me, though luckily my phone had service, and I was able to find my way back to the hotel I was staying at with no other problems. As soon as I got back, I googled the house and did some more research on it. Apparently, the house had been abandoned for 3 years. I checked the status of the original Facebook Marketplace posts I'd responded to, but of course, it was deleted. I debated whether or not to call the cops and report the situation, but decided against it, as I figured there wasn't much they could do. I can only imagine the guys I encountered that night were a group of homeless people with some unknown intentions. Whatever the case, the whole situation was extremely disturbing. My wife and I were looking for a used car on Facebook Marketplace, and actually found one we were really interested in. It was honestly a really good deal, and as soon as we saw it, we texted the seller saying we were interested. The seller seemed perfectly normal over text, and we agreed to meet in a public mall parking lot. He said he wouldn't be available until he got off work at 5, so we agreed to do the transaction at 5:30. Come 5:30, and we arrive at the mall telling the seller what car we were in, just to get a text saying he was running late. We weren't in any hurry, and we figured he'd only be like 30 minutes or so. We both agreed it'd be a good idea to go into the mall and get some food at the food court while we waited. A good 2 hours went by, both of us pretty impatient at this point. And that's when we got a text saying the guy would be at the mall soon. This was in late fall, so it was already getting dark, and we were starting to worry that the mall wouldn't be as busy soon. A little bit later, the guy texted us saying we should meet him at another location, about 30 minutes away in a rougher area of the city. I looked up the address, and found it was a gas station right off the interstate. What caught my eye was the hours. It wasn't one of those 24-hour gas stations, and they were actually already closed. My wife mentioned how many red flags the whole situation was giving off, but honestly, all I was thinking about was the car and how good of a deal we had found, so we ignored them. We sent over a text saying we'd be there in 30 minutes, and pulled out of the mall parking lot, making our way to the gas station. When we got there, we pulled into the parking lot, and quickly realized how dead the whole area was. There were only like a few vehicles parked. After about a minute, my wife pointed out the car, and sure enough there it was. But it looked to be in way worse condition than the original pictures on Facebook Marketplace. The car was in a pretty dark spot in the parking lot, way in the back. I started pulling up to it when I stopped. My wife looked at me confused, but I swear, I could see something. I got out of the car, and that's when my suspicion was confirmed. There was a spike strip right in the middle of the road, exactly where I would need to go to pull up next to the car. At that point, I knew something wasn't right. I got back in the car, backed up, and left the way I came. Once I got back home, I reported the whole situation to the cops, though I never even saw anyone. The only evidence I could give was the ad itself. I never knew what came of the whole situation, but the ad was taken down a few days later. I never heard back from the cops, so if they caught anyone or not, I don't know. Either way, this situation has caused me to be a lot more cautious when using services like Facebook Marketplace.
I bought a Nintendo Switch off a guy I met on Facebook Marketplace, and he acted so horribly after the fact that it almost put me off playing the thing entirely. He didn't really give off that nice guy vibe at first. Like it was only when I'd actually met him and bought the thing that he started getting weird. He kept trying to talk to me over WhatsApp, asking me how the Switch was, if I needed any help with it. Dumb, patronizing stuff like that. I politely decline at first, but it quickly gets to the point where I'm just leaving the guy on read and hoping that he'll get the message. He goes quiet for a bit, but then he starts the whole flirting routine again after about a week, and I have to kind of put my foot down and tell him that I'm not interested in him that way. Again, I kind of naively think he's going to just take it on the chin and move on, but nope. He starts off this big long message because all I can see is the little such and such a person is typing thing for about half an hour every time I go back to check the message thread. When the message comes through, it's this big tirade about how he'd been kind enough to give me a discount as it is. The least I could do was have some friendly chat with him. He actually accused me of flirting with him to drive the price down, too, something I categorically deny. I'm not even into guys. Then came the threats of what he'd do to me if he ever ran into me on a dark street. By that point, I'd stopped reading entirely and just blocked his number. But he knew my name, and it's not like I can just go and change my name because of one psycho on social media. But still, I worry he'll make good on his threats one day. What knocked me sick was how he made it clear that he was bigger than me, stronger, and faster, and that no matter how much I tried, he'd easily overpower me. The fact that he rubbed that in my face is just unbelievably scummy. But what frightens me is that he's actually right. One of the creepiest things I'd ever heard in my life is the story of a woman who had her life ruined by Facebook Live, of all things. Of all the social media horror stories you hear, this is one that's affected me the most, without a shadow of a doubt. And you have to forgive me if I get any details wrong. I'm pretty sure this happened a while ago and it's been years since I read anything about it. So, this couple have a horrendous divorce. This whole nightmarish maelstrom of pettiness and malice that turned them both into nasty, vengeful people. The way I heard it, the wife basically rinsed the husband for all he was worth, got custody of the kids, got a whole bunch of financial stuff on her side. She even took her ex-husband's dog. He tried all manner of messed up things to get revenge, but by far the most brutally effective thing he ever did to terrorize her involved an ad he posted on Facebook Marketplace. Basically, he pretends to be his ex-wife and posts a bunch of ads saying how she wants to make cuddle puddles with random guys and that she'll pay for it. Not exactly the wording used in the ads, obviously, but you get the idea. But the ex-wife doesn't hear about this. The first she heard of it was when dudes actually started turning up at her house. At first she just tells one or two of the guys to get out of there, obviously, and that they made a mistake, but it just keeps happening. Guys show up at her house, with every single one expecting something R-rated. The final straw came when a guy turned up at her house with a crowbar and actually tried to break in. Cops came, arrested the guy, and he actually shows the cops the advertisement the woman was supposed to have left on Facebook Marketplace. The angry ex-husband hadn't just posted one ad, he posted several, and each one was a step up in intensity. From what I read, the ads started out kinda seedy but relatively harmless, but then went on to include some seriously graphic stuff, along with her dress and contact details. Somehow the cops managed to prove it was the ex-husband posting the messages, and I'm pretty sure he got charged with some of those new revenge-type laws they introduced. It just scares the life out of me that someone can use the internet to do you harm like that. And most of us have big enough of an online presence to make that legitimately possible. That, and it's crazy how two people, who once loved each other enough to get married, can grow to hate each other so much that they'll do things to put each other's health in jeopardy. But I suppose that's just the world we live in. In November of 2015, our family got the devastating news that my grandpa had lost his battle with cancer. And the grief we felt was made all the worse because of a decades-long rift between his two children, my dad, who's also deceased, and my aunt. I won't bore you with the grimly tedious details of their squabble, but it basically meant in a time when we needed it the least, various family members were trading petty insults and bickering over his estate. The lowest point came when my aunt's side of my family basically looted his house, then rented a U-Haul to drop off boxes of all the stuff they didn't want, which amounted to anything they didn't deem financially valuable. My mom was so mad at first, but the boxes turned out to be an absolute goldmine of journals, photo albums, and pieces of miscellaneous memorabilia. It was a lot of work going through it all, but boy was it worth it. You see, my grandpa served in the U.S. Navy for 25 years and had sailed all over the world on various warships. His photo albums and journals told an incredible tale and included the story of how he'd met my grandma in Honolulu during a break in the fighting. Like I said, it was an heirloom gold mine, but there was also a lot of random stuff in there too. Old records and little knickknacks that we figured someone else might find valuable. I'd actually sold some stuff using Facebook Marketplace before, so I proposed to sell everything I could, then split the money 3 ways between me, my brother, and my mom. They were happy enough with the apartment, so I boxed up what I thought I could sell and drove home to my apartment. I took some photos, posted some ads, and was quite surprised at how quickly some of the stuff sold. The old records were especially popular, and someone even bought my grandpa's old bottle cap collection. The one thing I didn't think I'd be able to sell was this ugly little statuette, one that I assumed came from the time he was stationed in the South Pacific. About the size of an old Nokia phone, it looked like it was carved out of some kind of black volcanic rock, shiny in places but rough in others. The craftsmanship was admirable, but the details were hideous. It looked like a mix between a frog and a man that was in the middle of giving birth to a pineapple. Seriously. And aside from that, it just gave me the creeps. But like I said, it was shiny, and there was a slim chance someone might see it as some kind of collector's item, so why not at least try and sell it? Needless to say, when I got a message from a user who was willing to pay my $3 asking price, I was over the moon. We arranged a pickup time, and then I thought that was that, matter over and done with. But I was wrong. I told the nice lady I'd sell it to her and we'd swap phone numbers, but I didn't actually take the listing down. So on the exact same day she was due to pick it up, I ended up getting another message from a different user. I didn't think that I'd get even one offer for the Frogman, let alone two, only this new guy's message wasn't polite and inquiring. It was verging on frantic. The first message simply said, "Do you still have the idol?" And that was the first time I heard anyone use that word regarding the little carving or figure or whatever it was, and the use of the word idol struck me as distinctly odd, a technical term with sort of sinister connotations, I thought. I responded honestly, telling the guy I'd already made a deal with someone for the statuette and I was sorry for wasting his time. But if I'm honest, I only replied that way to try and coax him into making a bigger offer, and that's exactly what he did, albeit in the most dramatic way possible. "Call me and name your price," his next message said, along with his phone number. Those words, "name your price," really got their hooks into me, and although the nice lady I'd spoken to already was due to stop by that day, I gave the guy a call. First thing he asked me is how much I agreed to sell his idol for. His. Now he was claiming ownership on it too. When I told him just a couple of dollars, how I just wanted to get rid of it, he acted like I had just peed on the Mona Lisa. It got to the point where I politely asked him to make an offer before I ended the call. It was business, not the antique roadshow, I thought. And oh, did he oblige me. Like I said, I put that little statue thing on Facebook Marketplace for like $3 and I thought I'd be lucky to get that for it. This guy straight up offers me $1,000 to take it off my hands. And when he mistook my grasp of surprise for a rejection, he doubled his offer. $2,000 in cash for something I thought I ended up having to throw in the trash. I was practically shaking by the time we ended the call, and I had to take a moment to compose myself before calling the prospective buyer, apologizing profusely but canceling the deal. I just couldn't turn that amount of money down, and I know that most other people would have done the same in my position. We arranged to meet in a Whole Foods parking lot, one that just so happened to be across the street from my apartment. It was somewhere I'd used for public meetings before, a well-lit place that I knew well was covered by security cameras. It was a place I usually felt pretty comfortable meeting internet strangers, but for some reason, on this particular occasion, I was anything but chill. Maybe it was the fact that I'd never sold anything for $2,000 before, and just that amount of cash made me nervous. But in retrospect, I know it was something else. What made things worse is that I had no idea when he was due to arrive either. He just said that he'd give me a call whenever he was 5 minutes away. Couldn't give me an exact time, he just kinda told me he'd be there whenever he could manage it. I figured maybe 7 to 8 p.m. would be the latest he'd arrived. It was a weekday evening after all, but those times came and went, as did 9 and 10 at night, and the guy still hadn't arrived yet. It was almost 11 at night when I finally got the call saying he was on his way. By that time, I'd basically convinced myself the whole thing was some elaborate prank. I figured I was more likely to see myself appearing on Impractical Jokers than end up $2,000 richer. Point being, I was primed for disappointment. But despite being tardy, the guy was true to his word and called me saying he was a few minutes away from the Whole Foods parking lot. And that's when the whole thing went from seeming silly to just downright dumb. Every single other time I met a buyer, it had been in broad daylight with plenty of people around, not in a barely lit deserted area. But God, that $2,000 was just too good of a prospect to ignore. I ended up watching the parking lot from my window, telling myself that if the guy's car looked too sketchy or whatever, then I'd just turn my phone off, take the listing down, and forget the whole thing ever happened. But when this Lincoln Town Car rolls into the lot, I'm thinking, maybe this guy really is some eccentric wealthy collector. And a quick phone call confirms that it actually is him down there. So I put some shoes on, throw on a jacket, and walk downstairs to meet the guy. It's not like he could see me leaving my apartment, so for all he knew, I'd walk like 10 blocks to be there. And like I said, if it seems sketchy, I could just leave, right? Anyway, I give the buyer a little wave as I approach his car, before having to politely decline taking the passenger's side. Never get into cars with strange men, obviously. But he's only way too happy to get out. He didn't look quite like I expected him to either. Fancy car and all, but he looked like a history professor with some sort of meth habit. It's really all I can describe it as. Unshaven, barely washed, tweed jacket, and crazy hair. The whole thing went down like a sketchy drug deal. I basically demanded to see the cash, so I knew he was for real, and he was only too happy to show me. I could barely hide the delight on my face when I actually counted the cash, but that excitement paled in comparison to his own when he saw the little statue. From the way he was acting, I actually started to think I could have driven the price up by at least a couple of thousand. And in the end, I broke. I just had to ask why the little statue was worth so much to him. He looked at me like I just asked the most naive question imaginable, then said something that sent chills running down my spine. If you only knew what this thing is capable of, the blood that has been spilled for it, he said, holding the little statue tight in his grip like it was a cure for cancer or something. His eyes looked all wild, like he could barely contain himself, and his lips looked curled like he might burst into a fit of giggling at any moment. I told him I'd keep an eye out for more statues like it, that maybe my grandpa had more of them stashed away somewhere. And he just smiled, and told me it was the only one that existed, how no one would ever find or create another like it. And then just like that, before I had the chance to ask him anything else, he just gets back into his car and takes off. And that was the end of it. I didn't ever learn anything else about the little statue or the guy who bought it, and honestly, I don't think I want to know anything else. The encounter in that parking lot was one of the most unnerving things that's ever happened to me. I don't think that little statue has any sort of powers or anything, and I don't doubt it was some kind of rare native art piece, something to justify the crazy price tag, but the thing that actually scared me was how that guy seemed to feverishly believe in whatever perceived power the thing had. And what he'll do as a result is obviously far more dangerous than any little carving or statuette. I just hope he doesn't do anything too crazy, like hurting other people or even himself, because then that $2,000 I made will be little more than blood money in my eyes, and I'll have played a part in something truly terrible. I just try not to think about it too much. It was a while ago now, and I didn't see anything about occult sacrifices in the paper or whatever, but every so often I think about that little black statuette and how it made me feel when I looked at it, and I wonder if there wasn't something more going on beneath the surface.
It was the summer of last year, and I was a broke college student. My parents were happy to help with paying for the education, but my university was in an urban and rather upscale area. So despite the fact that most of my tuition was covered, I was still struggling to get by living costs. Food, clothes, and utilities were all very expensive. I worked long and hard hours at a local coffee shop as a barista, but this was starting to interfere with my education. I majored in biotechnology, which was a very difficult and competitive field of study at my school. The classes I had to take were extremely difficult and time-consuming. Sometimes I would stay up for several days together in order to balance out studying, attending lectures, and going to work. But hey, Someone had to pay for bus passes, and someone had to pay for my groceries. I didn't want to have to sacrifice my grades and future career opportunities solely due to the fact that I needed money right now. The worst part of all this was that I barely had a life of my own. With midterms coming up and finals a few weeks after that, hanging out with friends or just having fun in general really wasn't an option. I needed to make a lot of money fast and quick, something I could preferably do in the comfort of my own dorm. My mind immediately went to online jobs, but none of them seemed legitimate. Most of them required little time, but they obviously paid a little money. I asked an upperclassman friend of mine, and she suggested a couple things. At first, we were thinking of getting a sugar daddy, but that requires sometimes meeting those creepy old men in person, which I wasn't a huge fan of. But then my friend suggested selling a bit more revealing photos of myself online. She claimed that she and many other people she knew had done it loads of times, and you don't even need to show your face or that much of your body. People just pay ridiculous amounts of money even for slightly lewd photos. And considering that my roommate had just moved out with her boyfriend, I figured that this might be my best option. I had this room all to myself, and there was really no harm in doing this at this point. I immediately signed up as an OnlyFans creator. OnlyFans seemed to be the most credible and popular of these types of websites. They also seem to be the safest and are very liberal with how much profit the creators get to keep. Pretty much every other girl on my campus has one in their Instagram bio anyway, so I figured there's really no harm in trying. I didn't have too many other options anyways. It was a lot easier than I thought getting started. Rather young woman, and I considered myself to have a decent body. I saved up for a cheap but effective ring light off Amazon, and my smartphone had a good enough camera anyways. I started out by taking a profile picture. Nothing above my chin was shown. It was me posing all cute with only my underwear on. I bought a promotion from a rather large Twitter page for my OnlyFans, and it seemed to be working. I had already gotten a few subscribers and fans. I wasn't in the top 1% or anything, but my initial investments in the light and promotion were all paid off within a few days. I even took the following week off of work. I eventually went ahead and took the next few weeks of work off. I wanted to study for my midterms, and at this point OnlyFans seemed to be paying the bills pretty well. My audience seemed to be a mixture of mostly men, both old and young. But one day, as I was messaging a few fans, I noticed a DM request with an unusually high payment amount. Sure, a lot of these guys had their own weird kinks and would pay a surprising amount of money just to see my feet sometimes, but this was even stranger. I got a direct message from someone with the username John_Doe, and he was willing to pay $100 just for a photo of me smiling. I initially thought he had added an extra zero by accident, so I messaged him back just to make sure that he resends the request with the right amount, but the man was serious. He wanted to see a photo of me smiling for $100. I took a selfie immediately and sent it to him. He paid the amount in full. We kept messaging back and forth. He wanted to see a video of my full body from the neck down. I did, and he paid about $50. He wanted to see a photo of my hands, and I sent those to him as well. After paying unusually high amounts for rather weird photos, he proceeded to ask rather deep and odd questions. Started with things like, how old are you and are you single? And transitioned to much creepier things like, how many partners have you had in the past? Are you living with family? Do you live alone? Are you sexually active as of now? I got extremely weirded out by this, but I didn't want to be rude to the man. After all, he is a really big tipper. But eventually, the man started asking questions like, what STDs do I have? And at this point, I just quit the chat. I continued with my night and went to sleep not thinking much of it. There are plenty of weirdos online, and this man could have just been another one of them. That next day, I had just gotten home from class. The bus was a bit late, and so was I. I opened up my laptop in order to start my night job, if you will, and noticed my OnlyFans had a series of unread messages from John_Doe, the same weirdo from last night. I was hesitant to open them at first, but I did. It was a series of manic, crazy messages. It started off with him offering large sums of money just to talk to me, and then it transitioned to him getting very aggressive and making threats to track me down and attack me just because I ignored him. I had finally had enough. I reported the man to OnlyFans and blocked him. No amount of money was worth his attention, and I eventually just called it a night. I never heard back from John_Doe those next few days. Things went on considerably normal until one afternoon. It was around 4 p.m. and I was in my apartment. I was in the kitchen and I needed some fresh air, so I went outside my balcony to take a few deep breaths. But as I surveyed around the view, I noticed one of my neighbors on their balcony. This obviously wasn't particularly weird, but I noticed he was staring right at my building. It was an old man, looking at me in a somewhat intense or anxious manner. I waved to him as a friendly gesture, but received no reply. That's weird, I thought, but then things got even weirder. The man pulled out a pair of binoculars and stared at me, and then proceeded to scan up and down my building with his binoculars. I was extremely unsettled by this. It was like he was looking for someone. Could it be me? Why would this man be spying on me? I went back inside and tried to shake it off, but then it hit me. John_Doe from the last night. Could this be the man leaving me those messages? Could that creepy OnlyFans man be living right across from me? I knew I didn't have any time to waste, and I immediately reported him to my building. My building security said that they talked to the man and couldn't find any significant enough evidence that the man was doing anything wrong. They even tried telling the police as well, but they dropped the case because, well, they had nothing to report on either. I was very irritated by this, but I never saw the man peeping at me anymore, so I figured he got the message. But one day, I was walking back from a grocery trip. I was only a couple blocks away from my apartment building, and it was mid-evening. It was getting a bit dark, but there were streetlights and my apartment complex was in a rather nice area. Deep down, I knew this was a dumb decision to make because I was a young woman, but hell, I just wanted some food. But as I was walking, I felt watched. Got this weird sense that there were a pair of eyes glued onto me as I was walking down the street. The stairs to my apartment building were only a few blocks away, but as I got more and more creeped out, the distance seemed to get longer and longer. Subtly surveyed my surroundings and noticed the old man across the street. Eyes locked onto me. I couldn't believe it. The man was back at it. I started trying to walk a little faster and heard footsteps behind me. The quicker my footsteps got, the quicker the old man's did as well. At this point, it was a speed walking race with the old man and I. At that point, I started sprinting. I wasn't the fastest runner in the world, but I was much younger than the man. I could hopefully outpace him. Quickly darted around a corner and stood there and waited. I was behind a bus stop and essentially was hiding for my life at this point. I knew I had to try going directly to the police this time, but I needed to get to my apartment or to safety first. Who knew what this man would do to me, especially considering he was the one leaving those crazy messages on my OnlyFans. But to my surprise, a young man noticed me. "You okay, ma'am?" the man asked. The man was around my age, only a tad bit older maybe. He was casually dressed and quite good looking. "Yeah, it's just the man following you," he interrupted. I don't know what to do. I'm scared he'll step out and find me," I said. "Hey, don't worry. I can walk you to your apartment, if that makes you feel a bit better," the man said. I was a bit sketched out at first, obviously, but I accepted the offer. I was afraid for my life at this point, and any help I could get was worth it. The man seemed like a gentleman, and he genuinely wanted to walk me to my apartment building. We chatted a bit about our lives as we were walking, and he didn't really say much about his. The young man went by Jay, and he seemed to be a really nice guy. But as we were getting to my apartment building, there was an old van in the driveway that was never usually there. I had no idea what this random new vehicle was doing in our neighborhood at that time of day, but I just focused on getting to my door. But that's when I heard yelling behind me. "Wait! Wait!" It was the old man from before, and he was running after me, trying to get my attention. But before I could even react or comprehend what was going on, I felt Jay's hand latch onto my shoulders. He threw me into the oddly placed van. I didn't even have time to scream or react. He slammed the door shut and quickly started driving off. I tried my hardest to scream for help and get out of the van, but the back had no windows or access to the front seat. It was all padded down with wooden panels. I couldn't believe it. Jay was John_Doe. Jay was the one following me. But what did that mean for the old man? My thought was interrupted by the van coming to a sudden halt. Jay quickly yanked open the back door. The look in his eyes were completely different from when he walked me home. He had this crazed look on his face, almost like he was a different person altogether. He yanked me out of the van after taping my mouth shut and blindfolding me. Jay was pretty tall, and I'm not exactly the strongest person in the world, so I couldn't even resist. He dragged me into a building. I had no idea where I was, and I was freaking out. As he left me in what seemed to be a basement, he started telling me all the awful things he'd do to me and how I shouldn't have ignored him on OnlyFans. He walked away, and I sat there for what could have been only a few minutes, but felt like hours. I had given up all hope. Was this really it? Was this how my life was gonna end? My entire life was flashing back before my eyes. But suddenly, I heard sirens outside. Could it really be the police? Was it just an ambulance or fire truck passing by? Soon, I heard a loud yelling and pounding on the front door, followed by, "Police search warrant! Step out with your hands above your head!" There was a long, intense pause, followed by more commotion. After several minutes of rustling and more yelling upstairs, My blindfold and tape were removed from my mouth. It was an officer. They took me to the police station and asked me some questions about Jay. I explained to them the entirety of the OnlyFans situation and showed them screenshots. It turns out the man was mentally ill but was somehow released from the asylum. I asked the police how they found me and they explained everything. It turns out the old man I suspected from before was actually trying to help me. According to the police, Jay had somehow managed to track my IP address through OnlyFans and found out where I lived. He happened to live pretty close by to me, and CCTV footage showed Jay coming to my apartment and analyzing my path home from the same van. The old man was looking through binoculars because he wanted to know why there was a random new vehicle in the neighborhood and what it was doing by my building. It turns out he was following me that day in order to make sure I went home safe. He was very suspicious of Jay in the van. He was suspecting that Jay would somehow do something to me, but by the time he actually found out, it was too late. The old man was the one who got the van's plate number on camera and reported it to the police immediately. The police used traffic cameras and records in order to find out where the van was going and where it could end up. As soon as I got home, I explained to my friends what happened, and I deleted my entire OnlyFans account right after that. I soon went back to work at my cafe and tried to resume my normal life. It's been about a year since that happened, and the old man moved out since. He's now at a senior care center nearby, and while we rarely are in contact, we never ever mention Jay or the incident. For context, I'm a 20-year-old man. My name is Jack. But this horror story I'm gonna tell you didn't happen to me. It happened to a close friend of mine. Her name's Cecilia. We met on the integration meeting after our first day of college. I was pretty new to the area. I just moved from another city and I was excited to attend my dream college, get the best education I can and a good degree in my field. I had just moved here and all of my friends were in my hometown. I decided to make a new friend with this beautiful woman with a friendly face and say hi. Cecilia was gorgeous and probably one of the sweetest people I've ever met. She had big, beautiful blue eyes and glamorous skin. She really stood out from the crowd and, to me, glowed like an angel. I knew that she was someone special. I mean, hell, that's why she stuck out so much and I approached her. Something about her when I first met her indicated to me that we would share a lot of amazing moments in life. I knew that she was someone special just initially meeting her. So when I approached her and greeted her, it was a real pleasure. It turns out that she was new and rather lonely here as well. She was from a different state and was actually looking for a new friend herself. Figuring we had the same intentions, I invited her out for coffee that day. After that, I decided to go and talk with the rest of the freshmen from the meeting. I met a lot of my future friends that day, people who I still keep in contact with today. From that day forward, Cecilia and my relationship skyrocketed. We sat together during lectures, had lunch together. We FaceTimed each other almost every other day and gossiped harmlessly about our classmates. We truly were best friends. Unfortunately, things started going downhill after that. I myself was fortunate to have parents who financially supported me every step of the way. I could rent an apartment and buy everything I needed for a student's life with ease. But Cecilia had no financial support. She had to help herself. She worked a not-so-fun job at McDonald's and the hours were grueling and long. This was starting to interfere with her education and she had trouble studying. This really wasn't working out for her, so she started looking for smaller sort of side hustles online. She asked me for some advice or tips, but I didn't know what to tell her. Hell, I hadn't worked a day in my life. What was I gonna tell her? One day, Cecilia came across a website called OnlyFans. It was a pretty new and highly trending website. I didn't know much about the website, aside from the fact that it was known for adult content and pretty much every other Twitch streamer or Instagram girl had one in their bio. One day, she explained to me the nature of the website over FaceTime. She explained to me that she could make hundreds or even thousands of dollars just posing half naked online. Men were thirsty enough to just drop money on this stuff. She said she could finally be financially independent without even having to do any work. She didn't even have to show more intimate parts of her body and could make hundreds off fetishists who just want to see her hands or feet. She was blown away by the easy money and was eager to start an OnlyFans account. From that day, I warned her that it was a bad idea. It sounded like a dream side job at first and sounded like really good, easy money, but something was too good to be true. I told her that the whole idea of showing her face and body to a bunch of weirdos and creeps online could only be dangerous. You never know what their real intentions are behind a screen. She didn't seem to pay any mind to my concerns. She thought it was her easy way out of this problem. She truly didn't mind showing her body online if there was a monetary reward. I couldn't believe it. She really was this desperate. We got into a small argument, but I backed out. I realized I couldn't change her mind and let it be. She signed up for an account and started posting photos shortly after that. After a while, she told me that it was the best decision in her life. She told me she made triple the amount she made at McDonald's and barely had to put in any effort. She could actually focus on school and had spare time now. After she told me that a few men paid her thousands of dollars for some fully naked photos, I was very uncomfortable. I explained to her once again that this whole thing will backfire when some psychopath meets her, but she ignored my advice as usual. It bothered me. I personally felt that your body should be reserved for the one you love, the one who cares about you, the one who's there for you. But in the end of the day, it was her body and her life. None of my business. For the next few weeks, everything seemed to be going back to normal. But one day, something horrible happened. Normally, we would meet each other in the morning before classes, but she didn't show up. That's weird. I checked my phone and she didn't let me know. This was even weirder. Normally, she'd text me. I was surprised, but didn't think much of it. I decided to go on with the rest of my day. The day went by and I still didn't see her. She didn't join me at lunch or sit next to me during class. When I checked my phone that night, I noticed that she hadn't even been online since yesterday. 2 days went by and I started to get phone calls from her family and close friends. They wanted to know where she could possibly be. She literally disappeared from the face of the earth. Her mom eventually called the police and reported her as a missing person, and the search begun. For a few days, the police asked everyone around her, including me, about where they saw her the last time. But after a few more days of searching and still no trace of her, the police asked for volunteers to help them. Me and several of her other friends decided to join in on the search. Armed with flashlights, we all checked through the local forest. It was exhausting. We searched up and down and still didn't find a single trace of her or her body. At this point, her parents were devastated. They were already crying. They knew that after this much time of someone being missing, the chances of survival were really low. The police finally got a warrant to search through her apartment. But when they looked through there, they saw no traces of any violence or that anything could have happened. Nothing was touched. They expected a fight scene or some broken plates or a messed up bed. But this didn't add up. If she was abducted, there would be some traces or some sign. But no, the detectives found the apartment clean. The only lead they could find was an open OnlyFans page with her photos on it. They assumed that this was the doing of one of her followers, maybe. The police looked through her laptop thoroughly, but they still found nothing. Her messages and her subscribers revealed no information. Even their best investigator had no clue where she was. There was no trace of her or whether she was even alive. There were no suspects and no witnesses. The police and the volunteers searched for her for about another month. They did everything they could. They hung flyers, posted her on social media. Still, she wasn't found. The police eventually closed the case. Her family and friends were devastated. I considered myself lucky and let out a sigh of relief. My plan succeeded, and I was happy about that. It was a great idea. I left her body in the basement of an abandoned farmhouse about 100 miles from the city. Nobody even suspected me because I was playing along as a victim, a good friend who only wanted the best for her. I told her not to use OnlyFans, but she wouldn't listen to me. I couldn't let anyone aside from me watch her body. I hated the idea of these creepy old men seeing her. I hated seeing those photos online. She could only be mine, and mine alone. Maybe if she weren't so stubborn and listened to my advice, she would have lived. We were meant for each other. We would look perfect together. But she just treated me like a friend. I'm perfectly fine with what I did. I don't regret it. I want to start off the story by letting you guys know I in no way consider myself a hero of some sort. I feel what I did was completely necessary and needed no validation or praise. Any marginally decent human being would have done the same thing if they were in my shoes. The story took place several months ago, and it's still very fresh in my memory. It was late November, and my quarantine boredom had taken its peak. We had been at home for almost a year at that point, and my county went on its second full lockdown after another spike in cases. I'm a young man, and let's just say being indoors all day really brought out certain urges in me. The girl I'd been initially seeing had cut things off, and my sex life was put to a halt. Sure, I had work and a cat to take care of, chores to do, but I can speak for all of us when I say that most of us are pretty riled up in isolation. I found myself scrolling through social media one morning and stumbled across a very attractive girl. She had a little less than 8,000 followers on Instagram and about 3,000 on Twitter. Her name was Anna, and she was unbelievably beautiful. She seemed to be gaining a small bit of traction online. After stalking her socials a bit and finding the link tree in her bio, I found out she has an OnlyFans. Now, normally I don't spend money on this kind of stuff. There's plenty of lewd material online for free, and I had never found a girl on OnlyFans intriguing enough for me to drop the first month subscription. But Anna was my type, and most importantly, I was bored and horny. I figured if there was a time to say hell with it and try out a website like this, it would be now. So there I was, reluctantly entering my credit card information into OnlyFans. The subscription fee was around $10 a month, $7 for new subscribers. Not that bad if I'm being honest. Now, this was my first time using OnlyFans, but I had to say, I was pleased with what I got. To put it simply, there were a few more exclusive photos of Anna on the front page. I enjoyed scrolling through them a bit. A few days passed by and I still was occasionally looking at her OnlyFans page. After all, I paid for the whole month anyways. It actually felt quite nice supporting Anna financially. Her house always seemed dark and dingy. Something about where she was filming made me feel that she wasn't in the best financial situation. I mean, after all, she was on OnlyFans. I eventually discovered the DM or request feature and decided to have a go at it. The page had what seemed to be a chat room, similar to an Instagram direct message. It allowed the subscriber to communicate directly with the OnlyFans creator and request certain content and photos. One night, I was even more bored than usual and felt I had $1 or $2 to spare. I logged into my OnlyFans and opened up the direct messages feature. I said hi to Anna and got a response a few minutes later. It was a photo of her holding 2 fingers somewhat sideways over her mouth, seemingly a cute gesture for hello. I didn't immediately feel like asking her to send certain photos, so I tried to have a bit of small talk with her. She dodged almost every single question. Her age, where she's from. The only response I got back was how she's doing. A meager great was what she texted back. It was a bit sketchy, but I'd eventually dropped the idea of trying to get to know her. After all, she probably has a bunch of men like me in her DMs. How was I special? I made a few photo requests and there were a few dollars to unlock. A seductive pic here and another there. After a few picture exchanges, I decided to call it a night. But before I closed the tab, however, I decided to take another scroll up the page. You know, enjoy the pictures I paid for of this gorgeous woman. But as I scrolled up, I started noticing the flirty hand symbols she was throwing up. They weren't your usual peace signs. They were something familiar. I looked a bit closer and longer, and that's when it clicked. It was American Sign Language. My younger sister grew up deaf, so my family and I pretty much had to learn ASL in order to communicate with my sister. I took a look at the hand symbols she was making, the first one being the weird sideways peace sign. It was H. The next one, which I thought was her trying to imitate a cat pawing or purring, seemed to be an E. After that, there was one of her holding what seemed to be an L symbol over her head. The last one was with her 3 fingers seductively running up her arm. The fingers made a peace sign in ASL. The images in that order spelled help. I couldn't believe it. I thought these were weird hand symbols and were just some odd form of flirting or play. But it was a cry for help. What was happening? Why was she sending an SOS to me? Why not law enforcement? I immediately responded back, Anna, are you okay? Do you need my help? What's happening? I frantically sent. She responded with a video of her discreetly making the gesture in ASL that asks, do you know sign? I responded with yes, and asked her where she was. She responded with a video of her signing back, don't know. My mind was racing. What was happening? Was this some sort of sick joke or prank? I asked her if she knew roughly what city she was in or what locality, and she responded, no, don't know. I immediately called the police. I let them know everything that happened, and they identified the girl as Layla Ronson. She was a college student, who the university had initially thought dropped out due to her lack of attendance for months. She seemed to be doing OnlyFans against her own will under the name Anna. The police used the OnlyFans URL and managed to track the IP of where the videos and messages were coming from. It seemed to be a rather affluent housing complex a few hours away from me, in my same state. The police in that area managed to track down the house and rescue Layla, as well as make all the needed arrests. According to the investigators on the scene, Anna was kidnapped not too long ago from her university. She was held captive and made to make OnlyFans and other online content against her will in the basement of one of the houses. The man who kidnapped her would take all of the money made from the process and continue the cycle. I got a phone call from Layla herself a few days later, thanking me for helping her. She said the man who kidnapped her said if he caught her asking for help online, he would harm or kill her. He would occasionally peer over from the corner of the basement to see what exactly she was doing, and made sure she wasn't asking for anyone's help over OnlyFans. I haven't spoke with Anna since, and I deleted my OnlyFans account soon after the incident. I simply didn't want to ever think about that website again. This memory is not something I relish.
The following story is told from the point of view of a female. Last Thanksgiving, my boyfriend and I loaded our 2-month-old daughter into our car and drove from Miami to Naples to visit my family. Being new parents, we were extremely nervous about taking such a lengthy trip with the baby and packed for every possible scenario. We left shortly after 12, my boyfriend behind the wheel, and we hit the highway, which was swollen with holiday traffic. After about an hour of driving, the baby became fussy, and we pulled over at a rest stop to feed her and change her diaper. While I was changing her, my boyfriend stood outside the car stretching, and suddenly called my name. Peering outside the car, I looked across the street in the direction he was pointing. There was a clown with a purple star painted over his face, and wild, crazy, unkempt black hair, and a purple and white checkered outfit standing on the opposite side of the parking lot, just waving to people as they pulled in and out of the rest stop. I chuckled and returned to what I was doing, unbothered by the clown, figuring it was just part of some kind of promotion. As we pulled out of the station, the clown waved at us, and I gave a lazy acknowledgement back. Just before my boyfriend took his foot off the brake and eased into traffic, the clown gave me the most hungry, sinister smile I had ever seen, and shouted, "You would look amazing draped over my lap." Even through the closed car window, I heard him clearly, and said, "Wow, what a creep." As we drove away, I repeated what the clown had said to my boyfriend, who hadn't quite heard it, and for a few minutes he was dead set on turning around to confront him. But I told him it wasn't worth it, as we still had a long drive ahead of us. We arrived in Naples shortly after 2:30, and by then, I had already forgotten about the incident and didn't even bring it up to my parents. We had a great time at my parents' place and ended up leaving close to 11:30 at night, much later than we had intended to. My parents tried to convince us to stay, and while we had plenty of stuff for the baby, we hadn't packed any overnight things for ourselves. So we decided just to commit to the drive. We figured that there would be a lot less traffic, and it would take a shorter amount of time to get home. My boyfriend had been driving for about 45 minutes when he asked me if I wouldn't mind taking over, as he was having a hard time keeping his eyes focused. I told him to pull over at the next rest area, and I would take the wheel. After a few minutes, we see a sign for a rest area and pull into it. It wasn't the same rest stop as before. It had no bathrooms, vending machines, or anything. It was basically just a long parking lot, with one row of parking spaces which looped back onto the road. My boyfriend pulled the car into a spot, nose first, so it was facing a long chain link fence, and beyond it, there was just trees and a swamp. I couldn't see anything specific in the glow of the headlights. He put the car in park and left the engine running, and the lights on as he climbed out of the driver's seat. The baby started to fuss as soon as the car stopped moving, and after I climbed out of the passenger seat, I opened the back door to check on her. My boyfriend climbed into the passenger seat and immediately shut his eyes. After I confirmed that the baby was fine and would probably fall back asleep when we started driving again, I shut the back door and made my way to the driver's seat. That's when I heard the sound of the chain link fence rattling and something being dragged across the metal links, steadily drawing closer. I turned in the direction of the noise, and for a split second, I only noticed the dark outline of a figure on the opposite side of the fence, until they stepped into the light of our headlights. It was the exact same clown from the other rest stop. Except this time he had a large red stain splattered across his purple and white costume, and was dragging a broken beer bottle across the fence. He pressed his face directly into the gaps in the fence and smiled at me. He cackled, "Hello again," and started making lewd gestures with his tongue. I was at a loss for words. It was so unbelievably surreal that I could only stare at him in disbelief and horror, not knowing whether I should be truly afraid or start laughing at the absurdity of it. My boyfriend launched himself out of the passenger seat and screamed, "Get in the car!" When he opened his car door, the baby started crying out, and the sound could be heard across the silent parking lot, and the clown immediately started singing in a grotesque, uneven voice. "Rock-a-bye baby in the treetop. When the clown comes, the cradle will rock." My parents had given us a set of fancy glasses for our dining room table. My boyfriend launched one directly at the clown. The glass shattered against the chain link fence and sprayed tiny razor projectiles all over. The clown hissed and immediately booked it to the end of the fence. My boyfriend and I jumped into the car, slammed the doors, and locked them. I threw the car into reverse and backed out of the spot, and as we put the car in drive, we saw the clown charging towards us across the parking lot. My boyfriend yelled at me to hit him, but I swerved to avoid him and floored it out of the lot and back onto the highway. For the next several minutes my heart was racing, convinced that at any moment a speeding car would come up behind us and try to run us off the road. But fortunately that never happened. We were so shaken and traumatized that all we could do for the rest of the way home was ask each other over and over again, what the heck just happened? We could only speculate what the guy was doing out there at 12 a.m., dressed like a clown in the middle of the Everglades on Thanksgiving night. We considered that he was just trying to mess with people. But you would need some serious balls to pull that kind of stunt out there in the Everglades. The people that live around there don't put up with that kind of nonsense. And what was he even doing there? Just hiding behind the dark fence for a completely random car to show up so he could traumatize them? I don't know if the stain on his suit was actually blood, but he made us feel threatened enough that we felt justified throwing something at him. And seeing as how his response was to charge us, I suspect that his intentions were hostile. The fact that we had seen him earlier that day made the situation even worse, because it felt like he was stalking us. My boyfriend had a license to carry a gun, so all I can say is, it's a good thing that he wasn't packing that particular night. This Thanksgiving, we plan to stay home. I know when most people think of a female clown, they immediately think of the charismatic and very sexy Batman villain Harley Quinn, but I promise they're not all like that. Back in 2012, I was walking home one night at around 9. I live in Gilbert, Arizona, and was walking by a large wide open park with a couple of soccer fields and basketball courts when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The overhead lights were still on and illuminating the fields, and I noticed someone sitting cross-legged out on the grass. I pulled out my earbuds and stepped off the sidewalk to get a closer look. At first, I thought maybe it was someone who had hurt themselves, but as I took a few steps closer, I noticed that it was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, leaning forward over something. It was hard to tell her exact age because her face was covered in white makeup, and a red heart and a black spade painted on her cheeks. Her top lip was painted black, and her bottom lip dark red. She was wearing a gray hoodie with the hood up, but had 2 holes cut on either side to accommodate her blonde pigtails. I stopped in my tracks and glanced around, convinced that this was a YouTube prank or something. But we were in the middle of a wide open area, and aside from the occasional car passing by, we seemed completely alone. The clown lady was wearing bright red sneakers, torn jeans, and some kind of clawed glove on her right hand like Freddy Krueger. I was only a dozen feet or so away, close enough to say something, but I decided to back away slowly and not engage in whatever she was doing. As I took a step back, she called out to me without looking up.
"Where are you going? Come here!"
"Nah, I'm good," I replied, and continued to walk away. For the first time, she looked up and smiled way too big, showcasing far more teeth and gums than was necessary. She raised the clawed hand, and I noticed that at the ends of each fingertip was a sharp point, like a thumbtack.
You sure? More for me then.
That's when she pulled out a large kitchen knife, the size of an ear of corn, and started cutting into the thing on the ground. I glanced back down and noticed the thing that she was leaning over appeared to be a dead bird of some kind, and she was using her clawed hand to pull the feathers off. She stabbed at the bird with the blade, and then pulled out a flask out of her pocket and threw back a swig. I nearly fell backwards into the road as I maneuvered myself off the grass and onto the sidewalk. I didn't want to turn my back on her the whole time, convinced that it was a prank, and I should start looking around in every direction for someone with a camera or a phone. But there was no one else even remotely close by, and no place they could be hiding either. I quickly turned around and power walked down the sidewalk towards my apartment complex. As I reached the intersection, I was forced to wait for the traffic light to change so I could cross safely. My earbuds were back in, but I honestly wasn't listening to the music. I was so confused and unnerved by what I had just seen. I glanced over my shoulder and saw to my horror that the lady clown was walking up the sidewalk towards me, appearing to be looking directly at me. I wrenched out my earbuds again, glanced both ways, up and down the street, and even though the light was still green and the cars had the right-of-way, I sprinted across. When I reached the other side, I turned and saw that she was still approaching the intersection. She waved at me with her clawed hand, and a few feathers fluttered to the ground. She called out to me.
Don't get killed tonight.
At least I'm pretty sure that's what she said. There were sounds of traffic muffling her voice. I literally ran home, entered my gated apartment complex, and went the long way around the building just to make sure I wasn't being followed. I then climbed up the stairs, locked both of my locks, and stared out my peephole in a panic. For about 5 minutes before I finally calmed down, I didn't turn on any lights in the apartment, and instead used my phone to navigate to my bedroom, and then used a light from my laptop screen to change and go to bed. The following day, when the sun was high in the sky, I double-checked the spot where the clown lady had been, and the mutilated remains of a bird were lying on the grass. A few weeks later, I saw her again in broad daylight. I was driving my friend's car and noticed her walking down the sidewalk in full makeup in the exact same hoodie, dragging a garbage bag behind her. I turned the car around out of morbid curiosity and followed her for about a half mile, pulling over on the side of the road to let her walk ahead for a while and slowly continuing on. When she reached a wide open plot of dirt, I saw her pull out what looked like to be a dead rat from the garbage bag. She cut it open with a switchblade and wrung it out like a sponge, blood spilling onto the ground, and probably all over her clothes as well. That's when she turned towards me, and with blood running down her fingers, raised her right hand and put her thumb between her index finger and middle finger. This is known as giving someone the fig, and if anything, it's even more obscene than raising your middle finger. I immediately backed the car up and got the hell out of there. It's not that when she turned towards me that bothered me. She easily could have realized that she was being followed. It was the gesture she gave me. It's one I commonly use at people in traffic, and I always get a kick out of it because hardly anyone knows what that means. But I've never seen anyone else use it in my life, and the fact that she did really shook me. I mean, what are the chances she knew that I would understand it? I've since moved, but my buddy still lives out there, and occasionally tells me he spots her wandering the side of the road. So next time you're in Gilbert, keep an eye out.
A few years ago, I was looking for a roommate. The vacancy had risen because my previous one was a Swedish guy who had been having some trouble with homesickness. Eventually it got too much and he moved away to somewhere with a colder climate. So, as you do, I put some ads up on various sites, and it didn't take long before a guy called Robert responded. We messaged back and forth a couple of times and arranged to meet up one day at Starbucks. I was immediately struck by his easy charm and wit. You couldn't hope to meet a person who was easier to talk to. He was in art school with ambitions of making it big as a painter. How exactly one would go about that, I have no idea, but we had become friends straight away, and I didn't think twice about letting him move in. Just before we parted ways that day, Rob, as he'd insisted I'd call him, asked a question I really didn't anticipate. "Hey, I know this is a weird question, but, are you by chance afraid of clowns?" He said with a weird smile. I suppose so," I replied, wondering why anyone would ask. "I probably watched Stephen King's It at a stupidly young age. Are you scared of them?" "Oh, damn," he said. "I'm a clown on the weekends. I do like charity events and fundraisers, visit sick kids in hospitals sometimes. Is that a problem for you? I mean, I know some people are seriously afraid of clowns." "Oh, of course not. That sounds cool. It's just the bad clowns that scare me, you know." I had never personally known one before, but Rob didn't seem scary. "I promise, I don't kill kids," he said with a grin. He threw his neck back and drained the last of the coffee from the cup. "It's the adults I go for." I burst out laughing at his dark sense of humor. What a cool guy, I thought. I'm actually going to be looking forward to this new roommate situation. Our first few weeks living together went about as smoothly as possible, and things were a good deal more peaceful than they had been with my previous roommate. I definitely didn't miss being woken up at unholy hours by his sobbing. Rob would get up, go to class, come home, then paint or have a quick drink with a friend or two. Sometimes on the weekend, he'd put on his clown suit and go out to those charity events that he talked about. He didn't seem like a scary clown. He was so cool, in fact, that he even began to change my view of clowns. There was a freezer in our kitchen that I told Rob not to bother using. It hadn't been right since before he moved in. I kept meaning to call someone to come out and look at it or replace it, but I guess it must have slipped his mind. One day, about 5 months after Rob moved in, I came home to find the lights on but total silence in the house. That was strange. Rob was always watching TV or playing his guitar. He hated silence. But I really knew something was up when I noticed something different about that freezer. The freezer door was open. I walked over, looked inside. Oh my God. 8 chunks of a human body, all cut up neatly and stored tidily on the shelves. I can't really explain how I felt in that moment. I panicked. What the hell can you do in that situation? My mind was racing, and I thought back to the day we met Rob, and he made that joke about only killing adults. Holy shit. Just then, a faint shuffling noise came from Rob's room. I didn't know what to do. For some reason, I tiptoed over to his room to see what the hell was happening. I don't know. I suppose adrenaline just takes over at that point. I peered in, and sure enough, there he was, lying on the floor with a mad look in his eyes as he stared at the ceiling. After a long delay in which I'm sure he was aware of my presence, he looked up at me. "You sick bastard! I'm calling the police." Clowns are the worst roommates, don't you think? Always uncovering the dead bodies in places you specifically told them not to look. I'm afraid I had to kill him too. So now my old Swedish friend has a dorm partner to sleep along with him in that big freezer. Oh, by the way, I'm still looking for a new roommate, if anyone's interested.
This happened just last night. I live in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska, and my older cousin Odo and I were driving back home from the Home Depot in town, traveling at about 50 miles an hour down a long stretch of road with fields on either side. And I'm not joking when I say that clowns started appearing out of the tall grass to our left, at least 9 or 10 of them, each of them looking at us. They all put out their arms and acted like they were going to grab the truck. I was at the wheel, and Odo called out, "Holy shit, really?" As we began driving past a few of them, one of the clowns, either because he was more daring than the others, or just couldn't see very well in his mask, got way too close to the road, and I hit the brakes, not to stop the car but to slow it down. When they saw us slowing down, they made to rush the truck. Alarmed that they were suddenly swarming us, I instinctively hit the gas again. I slammed the front right side of the truck directly into one of them, knocking him down against the pavement. Immediately, all the other clowns started yelling and cursing, not really making to help their friend, but instead smashing their fists against the outside of the truck. Odo told me to put it in park, which I did, and he pulled a handgun from under the passenger seat. It was my uncle's gun, but I knew for a fact that it wasn't loaded because the firing pin was broken and the gun wasn't able to fire. He rolled down the window and pointed the gun directly at one of the clowns. The clowns immediately backed off. Then he yelled, "Give me a reason!" For a moment, there was just silence as the clowns backed away a few steps, but not enough for me to hit the gas and safely floor it out of there. Odo gestured to the clown on the pavement. "Is he alright?" The clown on the ground started crawling with his hands and knees and was shuffling away. Another clown carefully helped him to his feet. "Make a space." Odo gestured with the gun to the clowns in front of the truck, and they immediately parted. I put the car into drive and slowly started edging forward. "We have a dash cam, so don't bother calling the cops." Odo kept the gun pointed at all of them until we were far enough away, then rolled the passenger window back up. Seeing all those clowns clumped in the middle of the road in my rearview mirror was one of the strangest things I had ever seen. Odo placed the gun back under the seat before muttering that he hoped that the headlight wasn't cracked. When we got home, we opened some beers and watched Game of Thrones, and didn't even bring it up to my uncle when he got home. We didn't actually have a dash cam, but figured that there was no way for the clowns to know that for certain. I hope they learned something from this, because next time, I don't plan on hitting the brakes. The following story is told from the point of view of a female. Back during the height of the 2016 clown craze, where psychos were dressing up and wandering around rural and wooded areas, stalking and terrifying people, I was living in a very isolated and heavily wooded property in Connecticut. My driveway was so long that my house could not be seen from the road, and I never once had a problem with trespassers, so my kids were free to play outside in our yard whenever they wished. One afternoon, I was inside the house on a conference call when my 8-year-old daughter ran into the house, stating that there was a clown in our driveway. For the first several seconds, I was annoyed, because I was convinced she was either playing a joke on me or just seeing things. I excused myself from the call and asked her what she was doing there, and she simply replied, "It's pointing at us." Something in the way she said that made a chill run through me, and I stood up and walked out of the front door and onto the front steps. My daughter pointed and I saw a figure in a pink and blue striped outfit, standing by the tree line, waving and pointing towards my other 2 children, who were still close to the house, but calling over to the clown, asking what it wanted. I immediately called my kids inside and locked my front door. I told them to stay put, grabbed my stun gun from its spot, and got into my car. I called my husband as I drove the car out of the garage and down the driveway, telling him what was going on, and he told me to keep the car doors locked and not to get too close. I decided, at least for the time being, not to call the police, because it would have taken them a good half an hour just to get there, and by then, the clown would likely be gone. I didn't just want to disappear into the house and wait for this person to get bored. I wanted to confront him and tell him to stay away from my property and from my kids. The clown wasn't by the tree line when I left the garage, but I drove down the driveway, into the trees a short way, and saw him jogging away at a brisk pace. When he heard my car coming, he stopped and turned around and looked back towards me. He wasn't wearing a mask, but his face was heavily made up, complete with a clown nose. But what really shook me was that he appeared to be holding a croquet mallet in one of his hands. He waved at me before disappearing into the woods, and I slammed on my brakes and rolled down my window halfway, screaming at him to get the hell off my property. I floored it to the end of my driveway and drove back and forth in the hopes of finding a parked car with a license plate I could report, but there wasn't anything suspicious or out of place. I returned to the house to check on my kids, who were more amused and excited than afraid. Inwardly, I kicked myself for not taking a picture of the clown on my phone, just to have a record of it in case I needed to report it. I told my kids they had to stay inside for the rest of the day and figured that I would never see the clown again. Whoever it was had gotten his kicks and certainly would not risk trespassing on my property again. The kids were asleep, and my husband and I were skimming through Netflix, and I got up to let the cat out. I'm not exactly positive on what I saw, but there was definitely something across the yard. I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye and thought I saw the shadow of something cast by the moon disappearing around the corner. I turned on all the outside lights, and my husband and I looked around, but whatever it was did not reappear. It could have been a deer, I suppose, but the reason I suspect it was the clown was because of the following morning. When I drove my car to the end of the driveway, there was a purple balloon tied to our mailbox, and the little potted plant at the base of the post had been smashed, as if something big, like a mallet, had come down on it. Worried that the balloon was an indicator of some kind, I immediately untied it. The rest of that day passed without incident, and by the following afternoon, I'd forgotten all about the clown until my kids came back inside and told me he was back and pointing at them again. I yelled at the kids to come inside, but this time, instead of getting in the car, I grabbed my phone and stun gun and stupidly charged out of the front door and stomped across the yard, determined to get a picture this time, and at best stun him and hold him down until the cops came and dragged his ass away. I never saw him that time, and instead of just keeping my kids shut inside, I loaded them in the car and drove to my parents. This time they were a little more spooked by the clown, and I began to become concerned that perhaps my kids were not safe in the yard anymore. I asked them if it was the same clown, and they said it was, and this time he was holding a sledgehammer. I don't know if that was true, or if they were just misidentifying the croquet mallet. The following day, I decided to become a little more proactive. My parents let me borrow their black Labrador named Groucho. He was a friendly dog, but had a tremendously loud bark and was fiercely protective of the kids. For 2 days, nothing happened, and I was starting to hope that the clown had moved on to harass someone else. That's when it happened. I was returning back up the driveway in the car after getting the mail when I noticed the clown was sneaking through the woods. Groucho was in the back seat and immediately started barking loud enough to rupture my eardrums. I slammed on my brakes and immediately called the cops and told them that there was a trespasser on my property and he was carrying a weapon. I honestly couldn't tell if he was carrying the croquet mallet through the trees, but I know he had been carrying one before, so I felt I had a reasonable cause to assume. As I was on the phone with the cops, another call came in on my cell from the house. My oldest daughter was crying, saying that there was a clown standing on our back deck, right outside the sliding door. This one was dressed all in orange, with a blue face. I floored it back up the driveway, threw my car into park, and when I reached the garage, I saw the second clown sprinting towards the woods. I opened the rear door, and Groucho tore after the guy like a ballistic missile. He caught the clown right by the tree line, and the guy started screaming as the loyal dog leapt on top of him and tore at his costume. I distinctly heard 2 separate male voices yelling in the trees, though I couldn't make out exactly what was being said. My daughter was still on the line and confirmed to me that all the kids were still inside, so I went after my dog into the woods. When I found Groucho, he was limping slightly. I was infuriated to see that he had been stabbed with what could have been an ice pick or a screwdriver, but he ultimately seemed unbothered by it. When the cops arrived, I gave them my statement, and they searched the woods. About an hour later, I got a call saying that 2 men had been pulled over and arrested several miles away for reckless driving, and one of them had severe dog bites on both legs. Groucho went to the vet and got bandaged up, and fortunately he has been perfectly fine ever since. I never heard any follow-up pertaining to the arrest afterwards, but the whole situation still amazes me. Getting to our house through the woods isn't an easy 2-minute hike. These men had to walk a good 10 to 15 minutes through the thick forest in full clown makeup just to get close enough to see our house, all for the sake of pranking and terrorizing my family, who was just minding their own business. Their motives were completely lost on me, and the more research I did on this whole clown thing, the more I think it was some kind of test or initiation, and not just something bored people were doing to pass the time. They put real effort into stalking us, and ultimately were rewarded with a dog attack. I think they got lucky. Fortunately, I've never seen another trespasser on my property since.
On my 19th birthday, my stoner friend convinced me to try his medications, as he called them. Unfortunately, me agreeing to give some to my inexperienced friend led to horrible consequences. I experienced unimaginable pain and suffered for a few solid years after the incident. It all started at school that day. I decided to invite my two best friends for a sleepover. Let's call them Steve and Chris for the sake of the story. Steve and I went to the same class and we've known each other since childhood. The second friend, Chris, was a year younger than me. We were really close friends and always stuck together. All of us went to the same school back then, and just to clarify, in my country, you graduate from high school when you're 19 years old. So at 9 a.m., Steve approached me when I was collecting books for my morning classes. We shook hands and talked about some school stuff. Suddenly, he changed the subject and we started talking about the party. Hey man, thanks for inviting me to your house today. Of course, dude, how am I gonna spend my birthday without my best friend? That's why I got you a really special birthday present. Oh, really? What is it? You're gonna love it, dude, but I can't tell you right now. It's a surprise. Alright man, I like surprises. Keep it a secret till tonight. Oh, and aside from me, did you invite anyone else? What about Chris? He'll be there. I wanted to invite more people, but after last year's party, my parents didn't allow it. You were there, so you know. I remember, that was a crazy party, dude. They were so pissed after Kyle broke the window. Yeah, that was so wrong. Anyways, I got classes, dude. Remember, 8 p.m., my house tonight. Gotcha. Later, dude. I turned around and went to my class. I didn't think much about Steve's gift for me back then. I guessed it was some kind of liquor like usually when we partied. He was always the type of guy who liked to drink and party a lot. I was inviting him from time to time to my house, and he always had a bottle of vodka with him, so I thought that's what he would give me as a birthday present. I wasn't expecting anything more creative from him. Fast forward to 7 p.m., I finished school and went home. I went inside the house, and luckily, my parents were already gone. They decided to leave town after I asked them to because I wanted us to have the whole house to ourselves. I threw my backpack on my bed and started to get ready for the party. I turned the music on and prepared mattresses for my friends. I ordered some pizza and sat down on the couch waiting for them. It was almost 8:30 p.m. when I heard the doorbell ringing. Finally, they're here, I thought to myself. I run to the doors and open them. Hey, I was worried about you. Don't act like my mom, dude. Just take your gift. Thanks, dude. Come inside. We took the wrong bus, and that's why we're late. Well, now that you're finally here, I say we start drinking. Drinking? Oh, come on. That's for kids. When he said that, I was really surprised. At first, I thought he finally matured and stopped drinking so much, so I asked him, No way, Steve, you don't drink anymore? Nah, man, I just stepped up my game. I got something way better for you, birthday boy. I looked at him with eyes wide open. I was really excited and afraid at the same time. I still couldn't figure out what it was. I didn't want to wait much longer and invited the guys upstairs to my bedroom. Alright, take off your shoes and let's go upstairs. We all walked upstairs and went into my room. I closed the curtains and we sat in a circle. Steve looked at both of us and pulled a bag full of colorful drops from his backpack. What's this? It's ecstasy. A friend of mine is a supplier and he's legit. He ensured me that it's clean. Take one, that should be enough. When I saw the bag, I didn't freak out or anything. I always wanted to try ecstasy and I heard that it's harmless. I wanted to have fun that night and I trusted Steve, so I took one without hesitation. We were all excited about this new experience and didn't think that it could affect us that badly. Chris and Steve also took one. We decided to sit down on the couch and watch TV before the pills kicked in. But after about 20 minutes, I couldn't feel anything other than my stomach hurting. And neither of my friends looked like they were tripping or had any effect. Do you feel anything? No. Me neither. Maybe they don't work? Let's just take one more. Nah, man, I'll pass. My stomach hurts a little bit from the first drop. Because of what happened next, I think my stomach hurting saved my life back then. They grabbed the bag, took one more, and after a few minutes, even more. My stomach started to hurt really badly. After a while, I was feeling nauseous and dizzy. I guess that the drop started to work, but it wasn't a nice feeling. I straightened up on the couch and turned my head left to see how my friends are reacting. At first, it seemed like they were mindlessly watching TV and feeling well, but then I asked them, "Hey, how you guys feeling?" No response. I could only see them blinking while looking at the TV. I was really confused as to why they're not answering me, so I asked again, "Hey, gents, you hear me?" Still no response. Then it hit me. I noticed saliva pouring out of Chris's open mouth, and his eyes were slowly hiding under his eyelids. I started to panic. Steve didn't look too well, but he finally said something to me. "I'm not feeling well. He told me to do it. I said no." "What are you talking about, dude? Look at Chris. He looks like a zombie right now. I don't think that that's how those drops are supposed to work. What do we do?" Steve ignored me and mumbled something to himself, talking about some evil guy or something. I couldn't exactly understand him. I was terrified. I was the only one technically sober at this point. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline and my heart started to beat faster and faster. My dizziness and stomachache didn't want to stop. I got up and sat next to Chris, then grabbed him by his shoulders and shook him. "Hey, Chris, you alright, dude? Say something." "Hey, Chris, you in there, buddy? Speak." Chris looked like he was unconscious and even stopped blinking. His skin was slowly turning pale. I couldn't feel a pulse or any sign that he was breathing. I suspected that he overdosed, but I didn't know what to do in the situation. Chris's condition was getting worse and worse. Steve, you gotta help me, dude. Chris isn't breathing. What do we do?" No, leave me alone." He then put his head on his lap and started to swing his body. I stepped away from him. There was only one thing left to do. I knew this would lead to really bad consequences, but I had to save my friend's life. I was petrified, but I pulled myself together and ran to get my phone from the charger and called for an ambulance. The rest of the night I only vaguely remember. Maybe because of the drug, or maybe because of the paralyzing fear. It didn't take long for paramedics to arrive. They took us immediately to the hospital and performed CPR on Chris on the way. I remember they took Chris into one room and me and Steve into another. They assigned me a bed and I fell asleep immediately. After waking up, I heard the news and burst out in tears. Chris didn't make it. Steve was fine, but he was throwing up all day and suffered extremely. It turned out that the pills weren't clean. They were laced with PMA, a substance that's much more toxic than MDMA and takes longer to kick in. That's why we couldn't feel anything for so long, and apparently Chris took a fatal dose. Steve was sentenced to 5 years in prison for sharing the pills with us, and fortunately, I was only fined with about $5,000 and 100 hours of community service. My family was understandably angry and ashamed of me. I lost their trust, I think, for the rest of my life. I won't even mention the nightmares and anxiety I had for many years after the accident.
Just out of college, and despite having a degree, it was almost impossible for me to get a job. Day after day, week after week, I sent out my resume to every game developer and computer company in the country, and a few in Europe and Asia. 6 months into this, my money was running very low. This was when I was forced to face the facts. I needed a job immediately, and it didn't matter where and for how much. Just in time, I found a job listing for a video game store at the mall. You know the one I mean, and the terrible stories you hear about them are almost always true. Because of my background in games, I was given an interview immediately and hired soon after. My first shift was the following morning. Other than a few hiccups along the way, it kept my head above water until I got on with Dell 2 years later. The meat of the facts began just before my second year was about to start. Because of the high turnover, I was made an assistant manager by month 9. None of my shifts were evenings, so I was tasked with keeping the younger employees in line. A job I never really took seriously since I was only a few years older than they were. I didn't care how they acted as long as they did their job. Around this time, a girl was hired that could have been my undoing. The second I saw her, I knew she would be a problem. However, it wasn't just her that was the source of trouble. her super jealous boyfriend became a thorn in the side of every guy that worked with her, and sometimes just spoke to her. A shift of hers didn't go by without him showing up to check on her. Some nights, he would do no more than sit on a bench outside the store and watch her work, but anytime she would get too close to a guy for his liking, he'd approach them and physically intimidate the guy she was talking to. She never said a thing when this happened. I actually think she kind of liked it, but it would be what would push her away from him in the end. She'd worked at the store for a couple of weeks before someone showed her the hallways that ran along the back of every place. She took advantage of the fact he wasn't aware of them, and this turned out to be a big mistake. If any person reading this doesn't know what I'm talking about, pay attention. You're about to learn something. I'm not sure how common this is, but some indoor malls, those built in the old way where each store inhabited an area that leased from the mall owner, there are a network of paths or halls that run behind each business. They're used mainly by the employees. The system allows them to enter and leave their jobs without being seen by the customers, although I'm pretty sure their intended purpose was to give janitorial staff an uncluttered pathway to maintain the spaces. That being said, in all my time at that job, I only saw a member of the cleaning staff a handful of times. Most of those times, they were sneaking a cigarette rather than working. Luckily, we could still smoke inside the building back then. No one said anything to the office if they caught you, probably because they were doing the same thing on their breaks. If we are all on the same page now, I'll get to the real story. Like I said, his jealousy, no matter how it turned her on, was at the same time pushing her away. On her breaks, she'd often sneak out the back and disappear for a while. Where she went, I had no idea or really cared. The boyfriend took forever to catch on, but when he did, he was super angry. She continued this routine for a few months, and just one day, she never came back to the store. I didn't attach any importance to this. It was during the holidays and work was a nightmare. It wasn't uncommon for employees to go on break after an especially hectic rush and not return. The turnover was simply that bad. Things got a bit more interesting about 4 or 5 days later. The police showed up and had some questions about her disappearance. I was like, disappearance? What's going on here? They then informed me that she had been reported missing the day after she bailed on work by her parents. She had never made it home, and they thought we may know something. The crazy thing was that when they visited her boyfriend's place to see if she was there, in addition to him not being there, after some digging, they learned that nobody had seen either of them for about a week. I was quick to make it clear that I didn't know anything. I had just assumed she got sick of the place and bailed. I guess they were happy with that. Never heard from them again. Time passed and the situation around her almost faded completely from my mind, until something really big in February happened and brought it back into crystal clarity. Some workmen were renovating one of the store's spaces for an incoming client, and once they had completed emptying the space of what the previous renters had left behind, they began the undertaking of finding the source of a terrible smell. Initially, it had been inferred that the smell was emanating from some old food products left behind in the space, but even after the clearing, the stink remained. The next theory was that an animal like a rat had died in the wall. It had happened before. So, before they went to the extreme of busting holes in the walls to find the source of the smell, they went next door to the adjoining space that was also empty and had been for some time. They spent close to an hour sifting through tons of old displays and leftover building materials. It turned out that the mall had been using this space for years as storage and the place was a mess. The two guys tasked with doing this were about to say forget it, when one of them stumbled upon the source of the stink, and it definitely wasn't a rat. Someone had taken a large piece of plywood and put it over a tiny little closet, thus making it invisible. The guy had caught on that the smell grew worse as he got closer to this board, so he pushed aside the heavy display rack holding the board against the wall, and as soon as he pulled back the board, he found what was causing it. The semi-mummified body of what looked like a female was lying on the floor facing the wall. It appeared the arid and dry Arizona heat had preserved the corpse and suppressed decomposition. This had to have been why it wasn't stinking up the entire mall and managed to remain hidden for so long. Naturally, the mall was alive with talk of who the body could possibly belong to. Numbers of people had just stopped coming to work one day or skipped out during their lunch. We'd gone through at least 15 people in the last year ourselves. When the answer came, no one could have guessed who it was. Early one morning, I was awakened by my manager with the news that Becky Morrison was the person they found in the empty store. My only answer was, "Who?" He reminded me that she was the girl with the crazy, jealous boyfriend that had disappeared just before Christmas. I hung up and went back to sleep. When I returned from my shift that night, it was the only thing anyone could talk about. The next question asked was, who did it? The overall favorite was the crazy boyfriend. Everyone knew by now that he had disappeared just after her, and considering his body wasn't found alongside hers, it was a fair assumption. He was most definitely nuts. It made sense. The story took a whole new angle just a couple of weeks after she was identified. An article was published in the paper discussing a possible new motive behind this. The police had recently received information that Becky had been messing around with a fellow mall employee during her breaks. They were meeting in the unoccupied store her body had been discovered in and fooling around. After following some leads, they were able to identify the employee. He was a 22-year-old guy working in the Hallmark store, but no name was given. He told the officers that he and Becky were supposed to hook up the day she disappeared, but he got holed up by the time he'd reached the empty space and she was gone. He figured she couldn't wait and returned to work. It was only a few days later, when the cops showed up at the mall to ask questions, that he heard she was missing. His mind went straight to the worst, and he was afraid he'd be blamed for it, so he said nothing. Then, when the news reached him that the boyfriend was also missing, it was too late. He figured if the boyfriend was hiding out, waiting for his chance to get him, it was best for him to say nothing, just on the off chance he didn't know for sure who the guy was. It all boiled down to him being afraid, and with what I knew, I could understand. What nobody knew, and still probably doesn't, is that her and I had a thing for a short while too. It wasn't long, but once is all it takes. I was the person who told her about the back hallways, after all. We slipped out there a few times to mess around. Fortunately, we never got busted. When she moved on to the next guy, I wasn't hurt. I knew she had a boyfriend anyway. Now you know why I had to act as if though I didn't care about her. We figured it was the safest thing for the both of us. Turns out we were right. I was overjoyed no one knew about us. If the dude was crazy enough to strangle her for cheating, which seemed to be the reason, he would no doubt come after the dude she was with. I felt sorry for the Hallmark guy. It wouldn't take much mental math to figure out who he was, if he didn't already know, and since they still haven't found him to this day, the fear of her boyfriend popping up out of nowhere and putting some holes in him must have been real strong. I know I was looking over my shoulder for several years after. The police have this theory that he may have ended his life not long after. There hadn't been any activity on his bank account or card for years, and I still wasn't taking any chances. 9 years later, a week doesn't go by that I don't think about her. An outsider may have seen her as an easy girl, but I still don't think of her that way. It struck me that she was just looking for a guy that would treat her well and commit to her for the long term without being psychotic about it. She was genuinely a good person, and certainly didn't deserve the end she had, but then again, I can't think of very many that do. My name's Gerald and I'm 22. For the past year, I've encountered a buttload of crazy people and have accumulated even more crazy stories. While most of them would make you laugh, the one I've chosen to share was terrifying while it was happening and still gives me shivers when I remember it. A little more than a year ago, I applied for and got a job at my favorite convenience store across the street from my house. I'd moved there my sophomore year in college and decided to stay after I left school. This little store has served as a savior to me. Living as young men often do, I had very little money, but I was always confident I could find something to fill my belly regardless of how much was in my pocket at the time. So, when the time came, I was no longer able to rely on my parents for money. The corner store was the first place I went for a job. I was in luck. Only the day before, one of the employees was fired for stealing from the register. I took his place, and I've been here ever since. Like any other corner store, we sell alcohol. Beer, wine, liquor, the whole boat. Naturally, this makes us a beacon for the local drunks. These folks have served as countless hours of entertainment. While most are harmless people, on one specific occasion, a horribly violent outburst occurred. It was a quiet Saturday night, about an hour before close. Most of the regulars had made their appearances, a few more than once. The two involved in this incident had been in around 7 p.m. and had just returned. They were, or at least appeared to be, a couple. I'd seen them around the neighborhood since I moved in. The owner of the store said they'd been customers since he bought the store, and that was 13 years ago. Although they were not very talkative when they came in, I never had any reason to believe either could be violent. However, that night something had changed. Upon arriving the second time, they went straight to the cooler containing the quart and 40-ounce size beers. Nothing out of the ordinary, as I said, but tonight an argument between the two started soon after their arrival. Initially, I couldn't hear what it was about, but soon I could hear everything they said across the store. I minded my own business for a while, but once the female began screaming curse words at the man, I felt like I had to at least get them to take it outside. I wasn't sure what to say, but I began my walk to the opposite side of the small store. Before I was halfway there, the man started screaming back at the woman. I'm not sure exactly what she had said to him, but it had obviously infuriated him. Mere moments before, he had taken a quart bottle of Busch or some other cheap beer from the cooler. All of a sudden, he began striking down at the woman's head with it. I'm not sure if he thought it would break or if he intended on hurting her with the nearest thing, but strike after strike he continued. It was a horrifying thing to witness. I blame the entertainment industry for giving people the false impression of how easy it is to break a beer bottle over someone's head. I assure you, it's very hard. Following the fifth or sixth strike, the woman had dropped completely to the floor and stopped moving. The guy stood over her for a moment, but looked up when I assume he heard me running towards him. The second he saw me, he ran out the side door and disappeared into the darkness. The sight of her laying there made me sick to my stomach. The blood dripping from her ears was almost as shocking as the ever-growing pool around her head. It seemed like a bad idea to touch her, so I made the decision to let the paramedics check her for a pulse. When they arrived, she was still alive, but they didn't have much hope for her survival. The cops certainly weren't in any hurry to get there, but when they did finally arrive, 45 minutes later, I filled them in on all I had seen. From the way they reacted, I got a strong feeling that they were very familiar with the two. While on shift, a few days later, my boss called with some news. The female was brain dead, and her family had made the choice to let her pass. The cops had picked the guy up the following night. From the description my boss gave me, he didn't even seem to remember what had happened. The doctors that examined him said that it's likely he truly may not remember what he did, because of the many years of alcohol abuse had possibly destroyed his brain. Sounds like he might not get the full punishment due to him under the law. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Sometimes, it seems like people really do get away with murder. During my time in college, I had a friend whose dad owned an 800-acre piece of land in eastern Texas. In the past, he leased it out to hunters and paper companies, but was no longer doing it. He had built a cabin on the land a few years before and would let us go out there from time to time to mess around. It served as a great way to relax from the pressures of school and getting closer to nature. The spring break of 1997, we loaded up our trucks and headed for the cabin. Our plans included shooting guns, drinking beer, and other things rednecks like us do in the woods. Our first morning kept us pretty busy cleaning the cabin and moving all our stuff inside. Around dinner, we made a big fire outside and cooked a bunch of steaks and fried potatoes. We skipped dessert and broke open some beers. The sun went down not long after, and for the remainder of the evening, we got loaded and passed around a joint or two. At some point in the night, I heard a shuffling noise outside and went out to check on it. The fire was barely burning at that point, and just outside of its light, I swore I could see the shape of a man standing completely still. From what I could tell, he was facing me, perhaps waiting to see what I would do. I blinked my eyes real hard to get a clearer look, but my position and the lack of light made it hard to see clearly. The shape continued to stand still, so I decided I'd walk up a little closer in hopes of getting a better picture. The thought terrified me, but I was transfixed by the being. Or perhaps I was still too intoxicated to make wise decisions. I took 2 steps forward, but was distracted by a voice behind me. My friend had woken up and noticed the door was wide open. So he got out of bed and saw me walking around the fire. His voice caused me to jump a little, but I soon realized who it was speaking. I asked him if he saw the figure on the other side of the fire pit. He just laughed at me and said I must be so stoned I was seeing things. We laughed it off and returned to bed. On my way, I turned back to take one more look, but the shape was no longer there. I chuckled to myself and went back to sleep. The next morning, I wrote the whole experience off as the result of too much fun and went on with my day. We spent the first half of it fishing at the big pond. Post-lunch was shooting guns and one guy's compound bow that he had just bought. The beers and smoke were broken out after dinner. A game of poker was attempted but soon canceled in favor of another evening telling lies around the fire. On one of my many trips to relieve myself that night, I was spooked by the sound of a stick breaking close by and noped it back to the fire. The look of fear on my face made the other guys laugh their butts off. I tried to explain what had happened, but was quickly reminded that we weren't the only creatures in the woods. The reasoning seemed sound, so I accepted it. Not long after, we were standing around, involved in some deep discussion, and I turned to speak to the guy on my left. What I saw caused me to clench up so tight I could have snapped a steel rod with my sphincter. Standing within a few steps behind my friend was another man I did not recognize. It was like he appeared out of nowhere. What made it creepier was that he was staring intently at the back of his head, almost like he was trying to bore through it with his eyes. I remained frozen stiff. The longer I looked at him, I realized he was the same being I saw lingering outside the light of the fire the night before. He was average height with a long, unkempt beard. My friend continued rambling about whatever, unaware of his shadow. After several long seconds, the stranger turned to me with a blank expression and walked away. This was when my friend finally noticed my horrified look. When he spoke, the thrall of fear was released, and I began pointing and rambling about what I had just witnessed. He and my other friend laughed at me again. There was no way I was seeing things this time. I described the man, and one of them suggested he was a Bigfoot. Despite my protestations, no one was buying it, and I eventually cut my losses and shut up. However, I wasn't beat. Their mockery had made me even more determined to prove the stranger's existence. The next 2 days were quiet. No stranger, in other words, but I kept my eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. By our 5th morning, I was beginning to question my sanity. I'd seen this mysterious being stalking around us twice, and now it had suddenly disappeared. I resolved to put my quest on the back burner until some new evidence arose. My friend's dad had mentioned him, an owner of one of the surrounding properties, had spotted a small group of wild hogs running through his land, so we grabbed our rifles and went on the search for them. A mile or so down one of the property's many roads, we came across some hog wallows and knew we were on the scent. We went up the road, now on foot tracking them. Another mile on, we stumble upon 3 large hogs rooting up the ground and prepared to make bacon. 2 of us chambered around as quiet as possible on our rifles and took aim. I was less than a second from saying 3 and pulling the trigger when the loud crack of another rifle filled the air, followed closely by a burst of wood and bark above my friend's head. It took a moment for it to register that we were being shot at. A few seconds later, another crack and strike, this time even closer to my friend. We weren't going to wait for a third. The friend who appeared to be the target led us down a side trail that led back to the cabin. No more shots followed as we fled. However, instead of finding safety at the camp, the shots began again. Seeing no other option, we hopped into my truck and hauled it out of there. This was a time just before the commonality of cell phones, so we had to drive the 20 miles to town to get help. After we explained the situation, we returned to the property a few hours later with some deputies. We approached slowly and remained in the cars when we parked. We waited to see if the shots would start again, but nothing happened. A cursory look around counted 3 holes in the cabin and another 2 in my buddy's windshield. Perhaps the worst was that all of our camping stuff, sleeping bags and such, were spread out all over the ground. Luckily, we'd smoked everything the night before, so the police were none the wiser. Nothing was missing but a box of .30-30 ammo and, strangely, my sleeping bag and wool blanket. A theory began to form in the deputy's mind that we had stumbled upon a squatter or poacher camping out on the property for whatever reason. They acted as if they were going to let it go, but once my friend's dad, who owned the land, heard about it, he put pressure on them to start a search. This was about the time I repeated my story of seeing someone lurking around the cabin. No one was laughing now, and my story was finally being taken seriously by somebody. The search was led around the property by my friend's dad. School had already begun again by the time it took place. It continued for a full week, but nothing other than a few old camps were found. It was assumed that he knew the heat would be on him after the shooting incident, and he moved on. During the course of the investigation, several avenues were followed to ID the stranger like escaped cons, but he remains unidentified to this day. Because of the chance of another attack, our trips to the property ended. The next year we tried to camp out somewhere else, but it wasn't the same and our nature getaways died out. Within 5 years, my friend's dad had a heart attack and lost interest in the cabin. The paper company's lease were renewed and the land's trees have been used to make paper and pulpwood products ever since. Each time I jot down a quick note, I'm reminded of our awesome trips and especially the odd and terrifying week that caused them to stop. I do, once or twice a year, talk to my old college friends on the phone. As far as he's heard, that crazy stranger still hasn't been caught. We sometimes theorize as to his origins and where he may have ended up. I, however, often take this much further when I'm alone. I wonder why our so-called strangers seem to focus so much of his anger onto my friend, and perhaps, far more concerning, is he still out there waiting for his chance to finish what he began all those years ago?
I live in a major city in Texas. My apartment complex is gated and in a good neighborhood, but the security isn't extremely tight. Sometimes the gates are left open and anyone could piggyback off of someone else entering with the access code. Maybe twice in the past 3 years, the management has put out notices of vehicle break-ins and other items being stolen from porches. We also have frequent door-to-door solicitors, even though there are signs forbidding it. So this particular Friday evening, I go to bed at about 2:30 a.m. For some odd reason, I was having trouble getting to sleep, so I put on a podcast to listen to and eventually start to doze off. I become aware of a noise that sounds like a clicking sound, but it sounds like one of my upstairs neighbors making some noise. I kinda zoned this out, as I'm used to my neighbors staying up late on weekends. After about 30 seconds, I realize the noise is extremely repetitive and getting louder. I then start focusing on it more intently, trying to isolate what it could be and where it was coming from. Suddenly it hits me. It's coming from the entrance to my apartment. I leap out of bed and head to the foyer. I identify the noise right away. The lock mechanism is moving back and forth rapidly, like someone is trying to unlock the front door. I can hear that an object is inserted into the lock and the person is jimmying it back and forth with a lot of force. I instinctively turn around, head to my bedside safe, unlock it with the combination, and pull out my .357 SIG pistol, load a 14-round magazine, and chamber a hollow point round. I head back to the door, and as I exit the bedroom, I see the lock twist and unlatch. I immediately pointed my weapon straight ahead, knowing that if someone comes through, I will have to make a split-second reaction. I decide that if someone comes through my door, I will give them a momentary chance to retreat, but if they do anything other than that, or enter aggressively, I'm going to shoot and ask questions later. They don't enter. However, because I had also locked the deadbolt inside only, when I first moved in a year prior, I remember thinking that the deadbolt was a great security feature, and I got in the habit of always keeping it locked when I'm home. In hindsight, this decision saved me from a life-or-death confrontation. Upon realizing that, I approached the door and looked through the keyhole. On the other side are 3 Asians, 2 men and 1 woman. All 3 are wearing hoodies, so it's difficult to make out their faces. The men have objects in their hands, but I can't make out exactly what. The 2 men are talking back and forth, probably trying to figure out why they can't open the door, even though they have successfully opened the outside lock at this point. The woman is also talking loudly behind the 2 men, such that anyone in the hallway would be able to hear her voice. She's talking in another language. The only words I can make out are blah blah blah, apartment 250, blah blah blah, and she keeps repeating that over and over like a broken record. Upon hearing that, I start to wonder for a moment if maybe they're just drunk and have the wrong apartment number. But that's impossible. To open my lock, they would have to have a copy of my exact key or some kind of lock-picking device. I've never copied my key or even given it to anyone. And here's the other thing. Not only is 250 not my apartment number, but, as I figured out later, that apartment number doesn't exist anywhere in the complex. Standing back from the door, I take a long broom handle and jab it hard in the face of the door, letting them know that I'm on the other side. They immediately stop fiddling with the lock and take off running. I debate whether to call 911 and decide against it until they return. I know they'll be long gone by the time anyone gets there. It would be too risky to follow them to try and get a better description or license plate, and I don't have enough identifying info as it is to make an arrest. I filed a police report the next day and let the apartment management know. They said it was unusual, but they would alert the resource officer and ask for a police presence for a couple of nights. Nothing ever came of the report, but that's not a surprise to me. It's been 7 months since this happened and no further incidents. Nobody else in the apartment has reported anything similar happening. I don't think they'll be back, but one precaution I took was to buy a smart lock for the deadbolt, so I can leave that deadbolt always locked from the inside, even when I'm not home. It's crazy to think that the deadbolt was the only thing between myself and an armed confrontation with intruders. They say you don't really know what you'll do in those situations until it really happens, but I can honestly say I am proud of how I stayed calm and was mentally prepared to defend myself. If there's one good thing that came out of this, I feel confident that I responded the right way and was ready for the unthinkable.